The morning mist clung to the cobblestones of Thornfield Market like gossamer veils, obscuring the truth of what was to come. Lady Eleanor Blackwood, widowed these 18 months past, clutched her reticule with gloved fingers that betrayed not a tremor, though within her breast fluttered the wings of apprehension. Her mourning attire, now softened to lavenders and greys, attracted the curious gazes of the market-goers. For a widow of means venturing unaccompanied was fodder enough for whispers. "I shall require £3 of your finest tea, Mr. Simmons," she pronounced with measured dignity, ignoring the stares that pierced her composure like so many needles. The shopkeeper's hesitation was momentary, but unmistakable, like a dissonant note in an otherwise harmonious symphony. "Begging your pardon, Lady Blackwood," the man intoned, his voice dropping to a register that sent ice through her veins, "but I'm afraid I cannot extend further credit to Blackwood Manor. There are rumours, you see." The words struck her like a physical blow. Eleanor's spine straightened imperceptibly, the only outward sign of her distress. "I assure you, sir, that I have come with coin, not expectations of credit." Her voice remained melodious, though strained at the edges like fine porcelain about to crack. It was then that the crowd parted, revealing the tall, angular figure of Lord Bartholomew Reeves, the most notorious rake in 3 counties. His cravat was impeccable, his boots gleaming despite the early hour, his eyes sharp with the cunning of a man who collected secrets as others might collect snuff-boxes. "Why, Lady Blackwood," he drawled, each syllable dripping with false solicitude, "how fortuitous to encounter you in such humble surroundings." He removed his hat with a flourish that mocked the very concept of courtesy. "Lord Reeves," she acknowledged, with the barest inclination of her head, a gesture that spoke volumes of well-bred disdain. The market had grown silent, the morning activities suspended as if the world held its breath. Reeves stepped closer, close enough that the scent of expensive brandy and something darker, more insidious, reached her nostrils. "I had a most illuminating conversation with your late husband's solicitor yesterday," he continued, circling her like a vulture awaiting the final surrender of its prey. "It seems Blackwood Manor stands on foundations more fragile than its stone walls would suggest." The colour drained from Eleanor's face, the truth of her predicament expanding within her chest like a terrible flower. Sir William's gambling debts, the mortgaged estate, the desperate measures she had taken to maintain appearances, all threatened to burst forth into public knowledge. "Your concerns are misplaced, sir," she managed, though her voice had diminished to the merest whisper. Reeves leaned forward, his lips curved in what might have been a smile were it not for the cruelty evident in his eyes. "I have the papers, my dear Lady Blackwood, your late husband's markers, your estate, your future, all in my possession." The marketplace seemed to tilt beneath her feet, the mist thickening until she could scarcely draw breath. Mr. Simmons looked away, shame and pity warring on his weathered features. A lady nearby murmured behind her fan, the sound like the hiss of a serpent. "I shall call upon you tomorrow," Reeves stated, his voice pitched for her ears alone. "We shall discuss terms that may prove mutually beneficial." The suggestion in his tone made her skin crawl as if touched by something unclean. It was then that a small hand tugged at her skirts. Young Mary, the caretaker's daughter, her face upturned and solemn. "Begging your pardon, milady," the child said clearly, oblivious to the tension that enveloped them, "but cook says these flowers were left for you this morning, with a letter, all proper with a seal." Eleanor looked down at the modest bunch of violets, tied with a ribbon of deepest blue. From the simple bouquet protruded a cream-coloured envelope, sealed with wax the colour of burgundy wine. "Who brought these?" she asked, her voice steadier than she had any right to expect. "A gentleman's man, milady, tall and proper with a dark coat. Wouldn't say who sent him, only that his master wished you to have them before market." Eleanor accepted the offering with fingers that trembled now, despite her best efforts. The seal bore a crest she did not recognize, a falcon in flight above a crown. Reeves's expression darkened, a shadow passing over his features like a cloud obscuring the sun. "How touching," he sneered, though uncertainty had crept into his voice. "A secret admirer for the widow. Perhaps your circumstances are not as dire as reported." Eleanor clutched the flowers, as if they were a talisman against the evil that threatened to engulf her. The seal felt warm beneath her fingertip, as if imbued with some protective power. "Good day, Lord Reeves," she said, finding strength in the mysterious gift. "I believe our business is concluded for the present." The rake's eyes narrowed, but something in her renewed composure gave him pause. "Until tomorrow, Lady Blackwood," he promised, the threat evident in each syllable. "We shall see what tomorrow brings." As he strode away, his coattails snapping like flags in a storm, Eleanor's gaze fell upon the mysterious seal once more. Who would send such a gift? Who knew of her plight? The market resumed its bustle around her, but she stood motionless, suspended between despair and the faintest glimmer of hope. The wax seal gleamed in the weak morning light, the falcon seeming almost alive, wings spread in defiance or protection, she knew not which. But as she slipped the envelope into her reticule, she felt the weight of fate shift, like the balance of a scale tipping ever so slightly toward redemption. For in that moment, as the mist began to lift from Thornfield Market, revealing the spires of the village chapel in the distance, a new possibility had entered her world, one sealed in burgundy wax and fragranced with violets. The knock would come 3 times, and everything would change. The drawing-room at Blackwood Manor, once the pride of the county, now bore the subtle marks of genteel decline. The silk damask curtains, faded where afternoon sun had kissed them season after season, hung like silent sentinels over windows that offered a view of gardens slowly surrendering to wilderness. Eleanor sat beside the hearth, her posture impeccable despite the tumult within her breast, as she contemplated the mysterious seal upon the unopened letter. The violets rested in a crystal vase upon the side table, their modest beauty a stark contrast to the grandeur of their surroundings. Thrice she had reached for the envelope, and thrice her courage had faltered. What hope or doom might reside within its creamy confines? The falcon crest remained unfamiliar, though something in its bearing spoke of power beyond Lord Reeves's reach. "Madame," intoned Perkins, the elderly butler whose loyalty to Blackwood Manor transcended the matter of unpaid wages, "Lord Reeves has arrived." Eleanor's heart constricted, the moment she had dreaded now upon her like a sudden frost. "Show him in, Perkins," she commanded, her voice steady despite the tempest that raged within. The rake entered with the confidence of a man who believed the world bent to his whims. His attire was impeccable, his cravat a masterpiece of complexity, his waistcoat embroidered with silver thread that caught the firelight like avarice itself. "Lady Blackwood," he greeted, performing a bow that was technically perfect, yet somehow insulting in its execution. "I trust you have considered our forthcoming discussion with the gravity it deserves." Eleanor did not rise, but gestured to the chair opposite her own. "Lord Reeves, you find me at a disadvantage, but not without resources." Her gaze flicked momentarily to the sealed letter, a gesture not lost upon her unwelcome guest. "Ah yes, your mysterious correspondence," he drawled, seating himself with calculated languor. "A touching diversion, though ultimately futile. The fact remains, my dear lady, that your husband's debts, now legally mine, exceed the value of this estate by a considerable margin." "I am aware of Sir William's financial indiscretions," Eleanor replied, her hands folded in her lap to disguise their trembling, "though I confess I am curious as to how a man of your particular interests came to acquire such obligations." A smile curled Reeves's lips, cold as midwinter. "Men in their cups make poor decisions at the card table. Your husband was particularly inept at distinguishing friend from foe after his 5th brandy." The casual cruelty of the observation stung, yet Eleanor maintained her composure. "And what terms do you propose, sir, to resolve this unfortunate circumstance?" Reeves leaned forward, his eyes glittering with ill-concealed triumph. "Marriage, Lady Blackwood, a union that would settle all debts and secure your position, albeit under my protection rather than independence." The word fell between them like a stone into still waters, sending ripples of horror through Eleanor's frame. Marriage to such a man would be a fate worse than poverty, a prison from which even death might not provide escape. "I see you require time to accustom yourself to the idea," he continued, misinterpreting her silence for consideration. "Rest assured, I am not without generosity. You would maintain your position in society, even if your personal freedoms might necessarily be curtailed." Eleanor's fingers tightened around the fabric of her skirts. "You propose a most unconventional courtship, sir." "Courtship is a luxury afforded to those not drowning in debt," he countered smoothly. "I offer salvation, not romance." It was then that the drawing-room door opened without announcement, a breach of protocol so unexpected that both occupants turned in unison. The man who stood upon the threshold seemed to fill the doorframe with his presence rather than his physical form. Tall, certainly, broad of shoulder and narrow of waist, but it was the quality of stillness about him that commanded attention. His attire spoke of wealth worn with indifference, the finest fabrics tailored to perfection, yet utterly devoid of ostentation. His hair was the deep brown of polished walnut, his features carved by a sculptor who valued strength over conventional beauty. But it was his eyes that arrested Eleanor's attention, grey as the sea before a storm and equally unfathomable. "Your Grace," gasped Perkins from behind the imposing figure, "forgive the intrusion. His Grace, the Duke of Westmoreland." Lord Reeves shot to his feet, his face a study in conflicting emotions, outrage at the interruption warring with the instinctive deference demanded by such an exalted rank. "Westmoreland," he managed, executing a bow significantly deeper than that he had offered Eleanor. "This is unexpected." The Duke did not immediately acknowledge the rake, but instead turned his attention to Eleanor, who had risen on unsteady feet. He bowed with elegant precision, the movement containing neither the mockery of Reeves's greeting nor any excessive flourish. "Lady Blackwood," he said, his voice a rich baritone that seemed to resonate through the very foundations of the room. "I must beg your forgiveness for my unannounced arrival. I trust my messenger delivered my token earlier today." Understanding bloomed within Eleanor's breast. "The violets," she breathed, her gaze traveling to the mysterious letter she had yet to open. "Indeed." The Duke's expression remained impassive, yet something in the set of his shoulders suggested approval. "I see you have not yet broken the seal. Perhaps that is fortuitous, as I may now deliver my proposal in person." "Proposal?" Reeves interjected, his complexion flushing. "I fear your Grace has been misinformed. Lady Blackwood and I were in the midst of discussing terms of a private arrangement." The Duke turned to regard Reeves fully for the first time, his gaze sweeping over the rake with the detached interest one might afford an insect. "Lord Reeves," he acknowledged, the temperature of his voice dropping perceptibly, "your reputation precedes you." "As does yours, your Grace," Reeves responded, struggling to maintain his composure. "Though I confess your interest in Blackwood Manor comes as a surprise. The estate is hardly significant enough to warrant ducal attention." A smile ghosted across the Duke's lips, there and gone like lightning. "My interests are my own, sir, though I believe they may align with Lady Blackwood's welfare more harmoniously than the arrangement you were proposing." The air between the two men crackled with unspoken hostility, a silent battle of wills that Eleanor observed with bated breath. The Duke reached into his coat and withdrew a document bearing a seal identical to that on her unopened letter. "Lady Blackwood," he said, returning his attention to her, "I have taken the liberty of acquiring certain financial instruments pertaining to your late husband's estate. I believe this document will clarify my position." As if in a dream, Eleanor accepted the proffered paper. The seal broke with a soft crack that seemed to echo the fracturing of her previous reality. The document contained legal language beyond her immediate comprehension, but certain phrases leapt from the page. "All debts heretofore owed, complete satisfaction of obligations, transferred in entirety to His Grace." "You've purchased my husband's debts," she whispered, looking up to meet those storm-grey eyes. "I have," the Duke confirmed with a slight inclination of his head, "and I propose terms significantly different from those Lord Reeves was about to outline." The clock upon the mantel ticked in the silence that followed, each second a heartbeat in the strange tableau they formed, the widow, the rake, and the Duke, bound together by circumstance and sealed with burgundy wax. The knock came then, 3 times, precisely as Eleanor had imagined. The drawing-room door opened once more to admit a distinguished gentleman carrying a leather portfolio. "Mr. Harrington, your Grace," announced Perkins, as requested. The drawing-room at Blackwood Manor had witnessed many dramas through its storied existence: proposals of marriage, declarations of war, the whispered confidences of generations of women, but never had it contained such a concentration of power and tension as in this moment. The solicitor, Mr. Harrington, moved with the careful precision of a man accustomed to navigating the dangerous waters of aristocratic affairs, setting his leather portfolio upon the rosewood table with reverence. "Your Grace," he acknowledged the Duke with a bow. "Lady Blackwood, Lord Reeves." His greeting to the latter carried a distinct chill, like frost forming on autumn leaves. Eleanor's mind raced with the implications of this unexpected assembly. The Duke of Westmoreland, a figure of such consequence that his rare appearances at court were chronicled in every society paper, now stood in her fading drawing-room, having somehow acquired her late husband's ruinous debts. And now a solicitor of obvious distinction had arrived, summoned by the Duke for purposes yet unknown. "Shall we proceed, Mr. Harrington?" the Duke inquired, his tone suggesting the question was mere courtesy. "Indeed, your Grace." The solicitor opened his portfolio with practiced efficiency, extracting several documents bound with blue ribbon. "I have prepared the papers as instructed." Lord Reeves, whose complexion had alternated between florid indignation and ashen disbelief since the Duke's arrival, stepped forward with poorly concealed agitation. "I must object to these proceedings," he declared, his usual smooth manner fracturing under the strain. "Whatever arrangement your Grace proposes, I maintain prior claim to Sir William's obligations." The Duke regarded him with the mild interest of a naturalist observing a particularly tedious species of beetle. Your claim, Lord Reeves, was valid until precisely 9 o'clock this morning, when Mr. Harrington here completed the transfer of all such obligations to my name. He removed his gloves with deliberate care, revealing hands that, while aristocratic in their elegance, bore the subtle calluses of a man not afraid of practical matters. The law, in this instance, is unambiguous. Eleanor watched this exchange with mounting bewilderment, her gaze drawn repeatedly to the document she still held, the physical proof that her fate had changed hands like a chess piece in a game played by titans. "Your Grace," she ventured, her voice steadier than she had any right to expect, "while I am naturally grateful for your intervention, I confess I do not understand your interest in my husband's affairs." The Duke turned to her, and for an instant she glimpsed something in those storm-grey eyes that belied his impassive demeanour. A flash of emotion quickly mastered. "A fair question, Lady Blackwood, one which I intend to answer fully, though perhaps not in present company." His gaze flicked meaningfully toward Reeves. The Rake drew himself up, affronted dignity warring with the practicalities of his situation. "I am not so easily dismissed, Westmoreland, regardless of your rank. Lady Blackwood and I had reached an understanding." "Had you indeed?" The Duke's interruption was soft, yet somehow filled the room like thunder. "An understanding that would see a woman of quality bound to a man of your reputation?" "I think not, Mr." Harrington cleared his throat, a diplomatic intervention in what threatened to become an unseemly confrontation. "If I might suggest, Lord Reeves, your presence is no longer legally necessary for these proceedings. The documents are quite clear on the matter of precedence." Reeves looked from the solicitor to the Duke, then finally to Eleanor, who met his gaze with newfound resolve. Something in her expression, perhaps the absence of fear where before he had seen vulnerability, caused his features to twist in momentary fury before settling into a mask of cold calculation. "Very well," he conceded with brittle composure. "I shall withdraw, but this matter is not concluded to my satisfaction." He executed a bow of minimal adequacy. "Lady Blackwood, Your Grace, Mr. Harrington." With that, he strode from the room, his footsteps echoing with suppressed rage as he departed Blackwood Manor, leaving behind a silence pregnant with unspoken questions. When the front door had closed with a finality that seemed to mark the end of one chapter and the beginning of another, Eleanor found her voice once more. "Your Grace, I find myself at a loss. While Lord Reeves's proposal was unwelcome, I cannot fathom why you would involve yourself in the affairs of a stranger, particularly one whose circumstances are so reduced." The Duke moved to the hearth, gazing into the flames for a moment, as if seeking words within their dance. "We are not strangers, Lady Blackwood, though you have no reason to remember me. I was acquainted with your husband during our university days, before his habits led him down unfortunate paths." He turned, his expression softening slightly as he regarded her. "Sir William wrote to me some months before his passing, expressing concern for your welfare should the worst occur. I was abroad at the time and received news of his death only upon my return to England 6 weeks ago." Eleanor's breath caught. "He never mentioned such a correspondence." "Nor would he have," the Duke replied, a note of genuine regret colouring his tone. "Pride was ever William's companion, even in adversity. By the time he sought my assistance, I suspect he wished to spare you knowledge of how dire your circumstances had become." Mr. Harrington, ever the consummate professional, spread the documents upon the table, drawing their attention back to the practical matters at hand. "If I may, Your Grace." Lady Blackwood. They gathered around the table, Eleanor acutely aware of the Duke's presence at her side, not imposing, yet undeniably powerful. The solicitor indicated various passages with a slender finger. "These documents outline His Grace's proposal. In essence, Lady Blackwood, the Duke has not only acquired your late husband's debts, but has created a trust for the management of Blackwood Manor. The estate will remain in your name and under your control, with certain provisions for its maintenance and improvement." Eleanor's hands trembled as she scanned the legal terminology, struggling to comprehend the magnitude of what was being offered. "This is most generous, Your Grace, but surely you expect something in return." The Duke's expression remained inscrutable, though something flickered in the depths of his eyes, something that might have been amusement or perhaps approval at her direct inquiry. "I propose a bargain, Lady Blackwood, not charity," he stated plainly. "The terms are detailed in the second document." Mr. Harrington presented another paper, this one bearing the Duke's seal in burgundy wax. "His Grace requires your presence at Westmoreland House in London for the duration of the season. You would be introduced to society as being under his protection, his distant cousin perhaps, allowing you to move in circles that might otherwise be closed to a widow in reduced circumstances." "And what purpose would such an arrangement serve?" Eleanor asked. wariness mingling with curiosity. "I have my reasons," the Duke replied enigmatically, "which I shall explain in full once you have had time to consider my proposal. You need not decide immediately. Take the evening to reflect. The alternative being—" She lifted her chin, determined to understand fully what lay before her. A shadow passed over the Duke's features. "The alternative, madam, is that I shall still cancel your debts and establish the trust. Your welfare was important to William, and therefore it is important to me, but I believe the arrangement I propose would be mutually beneficial." Eleanor studied him, trying to discern the man beneath the ducal authority. What game was afoot? What possible advantage could her presence in London provide to a man of his stature? Yet even as suspicion bloomed, she could not deny the lifeline he offered. Freedom from Reeves's machinations, security for her home, and perhaps a chance to rebuild what had been lost. "I shall consider it," she said finally, her voice soft but resolute. The Duke inclined his head, satisfaction evident in the slight curve of his lips. "Excellent. I shall call tomorrow for your answer." He turned to the solicitor. "Mr. Harrington will leave these documents for your review." As the Duke retrieved his gloves, preparing to depart, Eleanor's gaze fell upon the violets in their crystal vase, humble flowers bearing a message she was only beginning to comprehend. "Your Grace," she ventured, "may I inquire as to the significance of the violets?" The Duke paused, glancing at the modest blooms. "They were your mother's favourite, were they not? William mentioned it once in passing. I thought they might bring you comfort." The simple statement, delivered without sentiment or expectation, pierced Eleanor's composure more effectively than any grand gesture. That this powerful stranger had remembered such an inconsequential detail, had thought to provide this small kindness amidst legal maneuverings and financial arrangements, spoke of a character far more complex than his austere demeanour suggested. "Thank you," she whispered, unable to articulate the emotions that threatened to overwhelm her carefully maintained dignity. The Duke bowed, a gesture of genuine respect rather than mere formality. "Until tomorrow, Lady Blackwood." As he departed, followed by the solicitor, Eleanor sank into her chair, the weight of the day's events pressing upon her like physical force. The clock chimed the hour, its familiar voice a reminder that time continued its march, regardless of how dramatically one's circumstances might change in the space of an afternoon. She touched the sealed letter that had started this extraordinary chain of events, the wax now broken, but the promise it contained only beginning to unfold. Outside, dusk gathered, casting long shadows across the gardens of Blackwood Manor. Within the drawing-room, Eleanor Blackwood contemplated violets and contracts, dukes and debts, and the mysterious hand of fate that had intervened just as all seemed lost. For tomorrow, she would give her answer, and nothing would ever be the same again. Morning light spilled through the windows of Blackwood Manor, illuminating motes of dust that danced like diminutive courtiers in its golden beams. Eleanor stood before the portrait of her late husband, seeking counsel from the painted eyes that had once gazed upon her with such affection. Sir William's likeness, commissioned in happier times, portrayed a gentleman of handsome countenance and easy charm, qualities that had won her heart despite her family's reservations. "What would you have me do, William?" she whispered, her fingers tracing the contours of the gilded frame. "Your friend the Duke offers salvation wrapped in mystery. Lord Reeves promises damnation disguised as security, and I stand between them, a pawn in a game whose rules remain obscure." The portrait maintained its enigmatic smile, offering no guidance. Yet as the sunlight shifted, catching the signet ring upon the painted hand, Eleanor felt resolution crystallize within her breast. She had survived 18 months of widowhood, navigating society's pitfalls and creditors' demands. Whatever the Duke's motives, they could scarcely be more sinister than Reeves's transparent avarice. "My lady," intoned Perkins from the doorway, "His Grace has arrived." Eleanor smoothed the fabric of her morning dress, lavender silk, the most hopeful colour her wardrobe contained, and squared her shoulders. "Show him to the drawing-room, Perkins. I shall join him directly." Alone once more, she touched the modest string of pearls at her throat, her mother's, one of the few treasures not mortgaged or sold, and drew a steadying breath. "Very well, William," she murmured to the portrait. "Let us see what fate your friend brings." The Duke awaited her by the window, his tall figure silhouetted against the spring sunshine. He turned at her entrance, executing a bow of perfect depth, neither the excessive deference that would mock her reduced circumstances, nor the cursory acknowledgment that would diminish her dignity. "Lady Blackwood," he greeted her, his storm-grey eyes assessing without intrusion. "I trust you have considered my proposal." "I have, Your Grace," she replied, her voice steady despite the tumult within her breast, "and I find myself inclined to accept, though not without reservation." A flicker of approval crossed his features. there and gone like the shadow of a swift-moving cloud. Caution becomes you, madam. I would think less of you had you agreed without question. Eleanor moved to the bell pull and summoned for tea, a domestic ritual that, despite her financial straits, remained within her power to offer. The small assertion of hostessship steadied her further. Perhaps, Your Grace, she suggested as they seated themselves, you might elaborate upon the bargain you propose. What role am I to play in London? What purpose will my presence serve? The Duke regarded her thoughtfully, his hands resting lightly on the arms of his chair. Even in repose, he emanated a quality of contained power, like a predator at rest, not threatening, but ever capable. I require a companion of impeccable breeding but limited connection to London society, he stated with characteristic directness. Someone whose judgment I can trust, whose observations will be both acute and discreet, and whose reputation is beyond reproach. Perkins entered with the tea tray, the china rattling slightly in his age-spotted hands. Eleanor busied herself with the familiar ceremony, grateful for the momentary diversion as she processed the Duke's words. You describe a lady's companion, Your Grace, she observed, passing him a cup of Darjeeling prepared to the exacting standards her mother had instilled. Surely a man of your standing has access to any number of suitable candidates without resorting to such elaborate arrangements. The Duke accepted the tea with a slight nod of thanks. A conventional companion would not serve. The matter is delicate. How so? Eleanor pressed, finding courage in curiosity. I have a ward, he revealed after a moment's consideration. A young lady of 17, the daughter of my late cousin. She comes into her inheritance this season and must be properly introduced to society. However, certain parties have expressed undue interest in her prospects. Understanding dawned. You seek a chaperone who can guard against fortune hunters. That, the Duke acknowledged, and something more. My position makes it difficult to observe the subtleties of ballroom politics without influencing them. Your presence would allow for, shall we say, reconnaissance, without declaration of intent. Eleanor sipped her tea, considering the implications. You wish me to be your eyes and ears in drawing rooms where your presence would alter behavior? Precisely. The Duke set down his cup with a decisive clink. Lady Rosalind is an innocent in the machinations of the ton. I would see her properly established, married to a man of character rather than one who covets only her dowry. And my role would be to identify suitable candidates while deflecting the unsuitable, Eleanor clarified, intrigued despite her misgivings. Among other duties, he confirmed, you would of course be established in a manner befitting your connection to me, an apartment in Westmoreland House, a suitable wardrobe, an allowance for personal expenses. The generosity of the arrangement was evident, yet pride compelled Eleanor to address the matter directly. Your Grace, I cannot help but wonder if there is more to this proposal than you have revealed. The resources you commit seem disproportionate to the service requested. For the first time, a genuine smile transformed the Duke's austere features, lending them a warmth that startled Eleanor with its effect. William spoke often of your perspicacity. He was not mistaken. The smile faded, replaced by an expression of sober candor. There are indeed additional factors, Lady Blackwood. Factors I am not at liberty to disclose fully at present. I ask for your trust, with the assurance that nothing I request will compromise your dignity or principles. Eleanor studied him, weighing sincerity against caution, opportunity against risk. After a moment, she set down her teacup with finality. Very well, Your Grace. I accept your proposal, on one condition. The Duke's eyebrow rose fractionally. And that would be? Complete honesty between us insofar as circumstances allow, she stated firmly. If I am to be your ally in this enterprise, I must know when you withhold information and why, even if you cannot share the information itself. A long moment stretched between them, taut with unspoken assessment. Then the Duke inclined his head, a gesture of acquiescence from one who rarely found it necessary to yield. Agreed, Lady Blackwood. You have my word. Thus was the bargain struck, sealed not with wax and paper, but with the invisible bonds of mutual necessity and cautious respect. Within the hour, arrangements were made. Eleanor would depart for London on the morrow, escorted by the Duke's trusted man of business. Blackwood Manor would remain under the stewardship of Perkins and the reduced staff, their wages now secure under the Duke's provisions. As the Duke took his leave, pausing on the threshold of Blackwood Manor, he turned to Eleanor with an expression she could not quite interpret. Lady Blackwood, he said, his voice pitched for her ears alone, I believe William would approve of our arrangement. The simple statement, delivered without artifice or sentimentality, touched something deep within Eleanor's breast. I believe he would, Your Grace, she replied softly, though he would doubtless warn me to be wary of your notorious self-possession. As well he should. the Duke acknowledged, the ghost of a smile playing about his lips. Until London, then. He departed in a flurry of hoofbeats and carriage wheels, leaving Eleanor to contemplate the turn her life had taken, from the brink of social ruin to the threshold of a ducal household, all in the space of 2 days. As she gazed out across the unkempt gardens of her ancestral home, the afternoon light burnishing the weathered stone to a semblance of its former glory, she felt the first stirrings of something long absent from her heart. Not hope, precisely. She was too pragmatic for such unfettered optimism, but perhaps a cautious faith that the sealed letter and its mysterious sender had indeed altered her fate in ways yet to be fully revealed, for the wax had broken, and with it the bonds of her former despair. London loomed before Eleanor like a vast breathing entity, its spires and smokestacks stretching toward a sky the colour of tarnished silver. The journey from Blackwood Manor had transported her across more than mere distance. It had carried her from the familiar rhythms of country widowhood to the pulsing heart of the season, where fortunes and reputations rose and fell with each passing hour. The Duke's carriage, a masterpiece of understated elegance, navigated the crowded streets with the quiet authority its master possessed in human form. Mr. Harrington, who had served as her escort throughout the journey, consulted his timepiece with practiced precision. "We shall arrive at Westmoreland House momentarily, Lady Blackwood," he informed her, his voice betraying nothing of the significance this moment held for his charge. "His Grace anticipated your arrival by noon and has arranged a light luncheon in the blue drawing-room." Eleanor smoothed her gloves over wrists that felt suddenly delicate, vulnerable. The carriage turned into an imposing square where trees stood in ordered ranks like sentinels guarding the grand houses that surrounded the central garden. Unlike the ostentatious mansions of the nouveau riche, with their gilded railings and excessive ornamentation, Westmoreland House presented a facade of classical proportions and dignified restraint. "Oh," breathed Eleanor, the syllable escaping before she could master her composure. Mr. Harrington permitted himself the smallest of smiles. "Indeed, Lady Blackwood, His Grace's London residence is considered among the finest examples of Georgian architecture in the city. The east wing was added by the current Duke's grandfather in 1771, and the gardens were redesigned under His Grace's personal supervision 3 years past." The carriage drew to a halt before a sweeping semicircular staircase of Portland stone. Footmen in the Duke's livery, midnight blue with silver accents, materialized as if conjured by some domestic sorcery, one opening the carriage door while another stood ready to assist her descent. Eleanor gathered her courage along with her skirts, determined that her entry into Westmoreland House would reflect the dignity the Duke had recognized in her, rather than the trepidation that threatened to overwhelm her senses. The footman's white-gloved hand steadied her as she emerged, her half-boots touching the immaculate stone with a finality that echoed through her being. The great doors swung open, revealing a marble entrance hall of such perfect proportions and exquisite detail that Eleanor momentarily forgot to breathe. Sunlight streamed through a domed skylight, illuminating a central mosaic floor where the Westmoreland crest, the falcon in flight above a crown, was rendered in tesserae of lapis lazuli and gold. "Lady Blackwood," intoned a distinguished gentleman who could only be the butler, "welcome to Westmoreland House. I am Graves. His Grace has instructed me to see you comfortably settled before presenting you to himself and Lady Rosalind." "Thank you, Graves," Eleanor replied, grateful that her voice remained steady despite the riot of impressions assailing her senses. The butler inclined his head with the precise degree of deference due to an honored guest of unspecified rank, a social calculation of such delicacy that Eleanor immediately recognized the caliber of staff the Duke employed. "Mrs. Wilson, the housekeeper, will show you to your apartments," Graves continued, gesturing toward a handsome woman of middle years who had appeared at his side with the silent efficiency that marked the Duke's household. "Your luggage shall be attended to, and refreshments will be served in your sitting room while you prepare for luncheon." Eleanor followed Mrs. Wilson up a sweeping staircase, each step bringing her further into the rarefied world of ducal privilege. The housekeeper maintained a respectful commentary as they progressed, identifying galleries and salons, indicating the wing reserved for family apartments, noting the location of the library. "His Grace spends many evenings there, my lady, should you require his counsel." At last they reached a corridor adorned with landscapes of exceptional quality, where Mrs. Wilson paused before a set of double doors. "Your apartments, Lady Blackwood," she announced, opening the doors to reveal a suite that stole the breath from Eleanor's lungs. Sunlight poured through tall windows draped in silk, the color of spring leaves, illuminating a sitting room appointed with furniture that blended elegance with comfort. Fresh flowers, Not violets, but creamy roses and sprigs of lavender adorned tables of polished rosewood. Beyond, through an open doorway, Eleanor glimpsed a bedchamber where a tester bed draped in azure damask promised luxury beyond her recent experience. "I trust you will find everything to your satisfaction, my lady," Mrs. Wilson stated, watching Eleanor's reaction with the quiet pride of one who had overseen the preparations. "His Grace was most particular about your accommodations." Eleanor turned slowly, absorbing details that spoke volumes about the thought invested in her comfort. A writing desk positioned to catch the northern light, bookshelves stocked with volumes both familiar and intriguing, a pianoforte in the corner of the sitting room. "It is beyond expectation," she admitted, removing her gloves with fingers that trembled slightly. "Please convey my appreciation to His Grace. You may do so yourself at luncheon, my lady." Mrs. Wilson replied with a smile that softened her efficient demeanor. "Your lady's maid, Martha, will assist you in refreshing yourself. She comes with excellent references and is skilled in current London fashions." As if summoned by her name, a young woman entered from a side door, curtsying with professional grace. "My lady," she greeted Eleanor, her accent betraying Yorkshire origins despite its careful modulation. "Would you prefer to change your travelling costume before luncheon? His Grace has arranged for several day dresses to be available until your own wardrobe can be supplemented." The implication that her country wardrobe would require enhancement for London society might have stung had it not been delivered with such matter-of-fact kindness. Eleanor recognized the consideration behind the arrangement, the Duke ensuring she need not face him or his ward feeling disadvantaged by inappropriate attire. "Yes, I believe I shall change," Eleanor decided, allowing Martha to assist her with the removal of her bonnet and Spencer jacket. "Something appropriate for a family luncheon, if you please." Half an hour later, attired in a day dress of periwinkle silk that complemented her complexion far more effectively than she had dared hope, Eleanor descended to the blue drawing room under Graves's escort. Her hair, arranged by Martha's skilled hands into a more fashionable style than her country maid had managed, was secured with combs of silver filigree that had appeared mysteriously among the toilet articles in her dressing room. The blue drawing room proved worthy of its name, a symphony in varying shades of azure and cerulean, from the silk-covered walls to the delicate wedgwood ornaments displayed in glass-fronted cabinets. The Duke stood by the marble fireplace, his tall figure as commanding in these elegant surroundings as it had been in her faded drawing-room at Blackwood Manor. Beside him, a young woman turned at Eleanor's entrance, Lady Rosalind presumably, though the girl's ethereal beauty came as something of a surprise. Fair-haired and slender, with eyes the clear blue of a summer sky, she possessed a quality of luminous innocence that would indeed require vigilant protection during her debut season. "Lady Blackwood," the Duke greeted her, his gaze assessing her transformed appearance with approval that, while restrained, was unmistakable. "Welcome to Westmoreland House. May I present my ward, Lady Rosalind Carrington?" The girl curtsied with perfect grace, though her open countenance revealed genuine curiosity rather than mere social polish. "Lady Blackwood," she said, her voice musical and unaffected, "how delightful to make your acquaintance at last. My guardian has spoken most highly of you." "Has he indeed?" Eleanor replied, unable to entirely suppress her surprise as she returned the curtsy. "I am honoured by His Grace's confidence, and look forward to our association, Lady Rosalind." The Duke gestured toward the luncheon table, set with china of such delicate translucence that it seemed to float above the damask cloth. "Shall we dine? I imagine Lady Blackwood would welcome refreshment after her journey." As they seated themselves, the Duke at the head of the table, Eleanor and Rosalind on either side, Eleanor observed the easy affection between guardian and ward, evident in small gestures and shared glances, despite the Duke's characteristic reserve. This was not the cold arrangement of convenience she had half expected, but a relationship of genuine care. "Lady Blackwood," Lady Rosalind began as footmen served the first course, "I understand you are to be my companion for the season. I cannot express how relieved I am to have someone besides my guardian to guide me through the labyrinth of society. Men, even dukes, understand so little of the subtleties involved." The Duke's lips curved in a barely perceptible smile. "I bow to the superior wisdom of ladies in matters of social navigation," he conceded with dry humour, "though I maintain that my understanding of character is sufficient to recognise those unworthy of my ward's attention, which would be approximately 98% of my admirers by his calculation," Lady Rosalind confided to Eleanor, with a conspiratorial smile. "I fear the remaining 2% consists entirely of octogenarian scholars and clergymen of impeccable piety but limited conversation." Rosalind exaggerates, the Duke countered, though affection warmed his tone. I merely insist that fortune hunters and libertines be excluded from consideration, regardless of their charm or title. Eleanor observed this exchange with growing fascination, sensing currents beneath the surface that had not been evident in the Duke's explanation of her role. There was something here beyond the straightforward protection of an heiress, something in the Duke's watchful gaze and Rosalind's carefully maintained brightness that spoke of concerns unvoiced. As luncheon progressed through courses of delicate artistry, Eleanor found herself drawn into comfortable conversation, the initial awkwardness of her position giving way to genuine engagement. Lady Rosalind proved both intelligent and refreshingly direct, while the Duke, though still reserved, revealed flashes of dry wit that transformed his austere countenance. Yet questions lingered in Eleanor's mind, multiplying with each observation. Why had the Duke truly sought her out? What threat to Lady Rosalind required such elaborate precautions, and what secret lay behind the careful attention he paid to his ward's every expression? As the meal concluded, the Duke rose with characteristic grace. If you'll excuse me, ladies, I have correspondence requiring attention. Lady Blackwood, perhaps you would join me in the library at 5. There are matters we should discuss before your first public appearance at Lady Harrington's musical evening tomorrow. Of course, Your Grace, Eleanor acknowledged, with an inclination of her head. When he had departed, Lady Rosalind leaned forward, her blue eyes alight with an emotion Eleanor could not immediately identify. Lady Blackwood, she said softly, her voice barely above a whisper, there is something you must know about my situation, something my guardian has not told you. The intensity of the girl's expression sent a chill through Eleanor's veins, like the first intimation of winter carried on an autumn breeze. Perhaps you might show me the gardens, Lady Rosalind, she suggested carefully, aware that even in a house as well run as Westmoreland's, walls might have ears. I understand they were redesigned under His Grace's direction. Comprehension flickered in the girl's eyes. An excellent suggestion, she agreed, rising with fluid grace. The rose garden is particularly fine and offers privacy for conversation. As they moved toward the terrace doors, Eleanor felt certainty settle in her breast. Whatever game was afoot in Westmoreland House, it was far more complex and potentially dangerous than a simple matter of chaperoning a wealthy debutante. For in Lady Rosalind's eyes, beneath the cultivated composure, Eleanor had recognized an emotion she knew all too well: fear. The gardens of Westmoreland House unfolded before Eleanor and Lady Rosalind like the sequential revelations of a carefully structured sonnet. Formal parterres gave way to a lime-tree avenue, which in turn led to the rose garden, a secluded sanctuary enclosed by yew hedges and anchored by a central fountain where water played over carved dolphins, its gentle music providing both ambience and discretion. Eleanor observed her companion closely as they strolled, noting the subtle transformation in Lady Rosalind's demeanor once they passed beyond the immediate surveillance of the house. The girl's shoulders relaxed infinitesimally, her steps became more natural, less measured, and the fixed brightness of her smile softened into something more genuine, if more complex. You must think me terribly forward, Lady Blackwood, Rosalind ventured as they reached the heart of the rose garden, where stone benches offered repose beneath arbors heavy with early blooms. I assure you, I am not typically given to melodrama or conspiracies. I think you are a young woman with something weighing upon her mind, Eleanor replied gently, seating herself and arranging her skirts to allow Rosalind space beside her. And I suspect that something pertains to your upcoming debut and the role I am to play in it. Rosalind's delicate fingers plucked nervously at the ribbon of her parasol. You are precisely as my guardian described you, perceptive and direct. She drew a steadying breath, her gaze fixed upon the dancing waters of the fountain. Lady Blackwood, are you familiar with the circumstances of my parents' deaths? The question, unexpected in both its content and abruptness, momentarily silenced Eleanor. I am not, she admitted after a pause. The Duke mentioned only that you were his cousin's daughter, and now his ward. I confess I did not press for details. They died in a boating accident on Lake Como 3 years ago, Rosalind related, her voice taking on the flat quality that Eleanor recognized as carefully controlled emotion. Or rather, that is the official account. A sudden squall, an overturned pleasure craft, a tragic drowning despite the efforts of local fishermen. Eleanor noted the specific phrasing. But you believe otherwise. A ghost of a smile, sad yet appreciative, touched Rosalind's lips. Indeed, as does my guardian, though he would never say so openly. She lowered her voice, though no one was near. Lady Blackwood, the morning of their drowning, my father had written to the Duke, a letter that arrived only after news of their deaths. In it, he expressed concern for my safety and suggested that certain parties had shown undue interest in my inheritance. "I see," murmured Eleanor, pieces of the puzzle beginning to shift into new configurations. "And this inheritance is substantial. Substantial enough to motivate murder, it seems," Rosalind confirmed, with a directness that belied her youth. "Beyond the Carrington estates, which are entailed to a distant cousin, I inherit my mother's fortune. Industrial investments primarily, quite vulgar by aristocratic standards, but exceedingly profitable. I come into control of these assets on my 18th birthday or upon my marriage, whichever comes first." Understanding bloomed within Eleanor's mind, hence the Duke's concern about fortune hunters. Yes, though that is merely the most conventional of the threats. Rosalind's blue eyes met Eleanor's with startling intensity. "Lady Blackwood, there have been incidents since I came under my guardian's protection. A riding accident where my saddle girth was mysteriously weakened, a stone that fell from a building facade as I passed below, missing me by inches, a footman discovered in my chambers without explanation, who disappeared before he could be questioned." Eleanor felt a chill that had nothing to do with the spring breeze. "You believe these were deliberate attempts on your life?" "My guardian does," Rosalind stated simply. "Though he shields me from the worst of his suspicions, I am neither blind nor stupid. The restrictions he places upon my movements, the careful vetting of all who enter Westmoreland House, the fact that I am never left unattended, these are not the common precautions of an overprotective guardian." Eleanor considered this revelation, reconciling it with the Duke's careful explanation of her role. "And now the season approaches, requiring your entry into society, where such protections become more difficult to maintain." "Precisely." Rosalind's fingers stilled on her parasol, a decision apparently reached. "Lady Blackwood, I must be honest with you. Your predecessor, the lady originally engaged as my companion for the season, withdrew from the position after receiving an anonymous letter. Its contents were never revealed to me, but she departed Westmoreland House within the hour, visibly shaken." This disclosure startled Eleanor more than the talk of potential assassins. The Duke failed to mention this detail. "He would not wish to frighten you unnecessarily," Rosalind responded, a hint of fondness warming her voice despite the gravity of their conversation. "My guardian believes in providing information on a need-to-know basis, a frustrating philosophy for those of us deemed in need of protection." A rustle in the nearby shrubbery caused both women to start, though it proved to be merely a garden thrush which regarded them indignantly before resuming its search for worms. Eleanor used the momentary distraction to collect her thoughts, which tumbled like leaves in an autumn gale. "Lady Rosalind," she said carefully, "I appreciate your candor, though I confess it places me in a difficult position. You have shared confidences your guardian clearly intended to withhold, at least initially." "I know," the girl acknowledged, regret evident in her expression, "and I would not have done so were the stakes less significant. But you deserve to know the true nature of the role you have accepted. My guardian, for all his admirable qualities, can be opaque regarding matters he considers potentially distressing to others." Eleanor could not suppress a wry smile. "A characteristic I have already observed." She paused, weighing propriety against practicality. "May I ask why you believe I was selected for this position? Surely there are companions with greater experience in navigating London society, or even in matters of personal protection." Rosalind's response came without hesitation. "Because you have nothing to gain and everything to lose from association with potential danger. Your reputation is impeccable, your connection to my guardian established through your late husband, and your financial situation, forgive my bluntness, recently secured through his intervention. You have no ties to London society that might compromise your loyalty, yet your breeding and education equip you to move within it convincingly." The assessment, delivered with clear-eyed pragmatism beyond Rosalind's years, struck Eleanor with its accuracy. "You have given this considerable thought. I have had little else to occupy me," Rosalind admitted, with a flash of the frustrated energy that must lurk beneath her cultivated composure. "Westmoreland House, for all its splendor, has been a rather elegant prison these past months." Eleanor regarded the young woman before her with newfound respect and concern. Beneath the beauty and privilege lay a keen intelligence and remarkable fortitude, qualities that made the threats against her all the more disturbing. "I appreciate your trust in me, Lady Rosalind," she said finally, "though I must tell you that I intend to discuss this conversation with the Duke this afternoon." "I would expect nothing less," Rosalind replied, genuine relief evident in her posture. "Indeed, I had hoped you would. My guardian respects directness, though he rarely encounters it among his social peers. The distant chiming of a clock recalled them to the passage of time. As they rose to return to the house, Eleanor found herself revisiting the Duke's careful explanation of her duties, recognizing now the deliberate omissions, the spaces between words where danger lurked unnamed. "Lady Blackwood," Rosalind said as they approached the terrace, her voice dropping once more to a near whisper, "there is one more thing you should know. My guardian believes he knows who may be responsible for the threats against me, though he lacks definitive proof." Eleanor's pulse quickened. "And who would that be?" "My cousin, Lord Julian Carrington," Rosalind revealed, the name falling between them like a stone into still waters. "The same who inherits the entailed estates upon my death, should I fail to produce an heir. He arrived in London 3 days ago and has already requested an audience with my guardian." The significance of this information was not lost on Eleanor. "And the Duke granted this request?" A smile of grim satisfaction curved Rosalind's lips. "Indeed. The audience is scheduled for tomorrow morning. Lord Julian will be admitted to Westmoreland House under my guardian's watchful eye, and I suspect, with certain precautions in place, that my cousin will never detect." They had reached the terrace doors where the controlled environment of Westmoreland House awaited them, a world of careful manners and unspoken tensions, of danger masked by decorum. Before they crossed that threshold, Rosalind turned to Eleanor, her expression suddenly vulnerable despite her earlier composure. "I am glad you are here, Lady Blackwood," she said simply. "I have been rather lonely, despite my guardian's care." The admission, offered without calculation or artifice, touched Eleanor more deeply than elaborate expressions of gratitude might have done. "I am glad to be of service, Lady Rosalind," she replied with equal sincerity. As they re-entered the house, Eleanor felt the weight of responsibility settle upon her shoulders like a mantle, heavier than expected, yet not unwelcome. Whatever danger the season might bring, whatever games of power and inheritance swirled around the luminous young woman at her side, Eleanor found herself committed to a course from which retreat now seemed impossible. For the Duke's cryptic bargain had revealed its true nature at last, not merely a social arrangement or a convenient alliance, but a matter of life and death played out against the glittering backdrop of London society. And as the doors of Westmoreland House closed behind them, Eleanor knew with sudden certainty that her life had changed irrevocably, not in the drawing room where debts were settled and proposals made, but here, in a rose garden, where secrets bloomed alongside more innocent flowers. The clock in the hall struck 3, each resonant tone marking the diminishing hours before her appointed meeting with the Duke. Eleanor straightened her shoulders, determination replacing trepidation in her breast. The game was afoot, and she intended to be a player, not merely a piece upon the board. The library of Westmoreland House stood as a testament to generations of ducal bibliophiles, 2 stories of leather-bound wisdom connected by a wrought-iron spiral staircase, with reading alcoves nestled between mahogany bookshelves like intellectual confessionals. Eleanor paused at the threshold, momentarily arrested by the magnificence of the collection and the man who presided over it. The Duke stood at a massive desk of polished oak, his attention absorbed by a document that bore a familiar seal of burgundy wax. He looked up at her entrance, his storm-grey eyes registering something that might have been approval at her punctuality. "Lady Blackwood," he acknowledged, setting aside the document. "Please be seated." Eleanor moved toward the indicated armchair, her steps measured and deliberate. The intervening hours since her garden conversation with Lady Rosalind had provided ample time for reflection, for the formulation of questions that required answers before she could proceed further in this arrangement. "Your Grace," she began once seated, her hands folded in her lap with deceptive tranquility, "I find myself in possession of information you chose to withhold regarding the nature of my position here." The Duke's expression remained impassive, though a slight tension around his eyes betrayed his recognition of her meaning. "I see Lady Rosalind has taken you into her confidence, earlier than I had anticipated, though not entirely unexpected." "You might have anticipated it by being forthright from the beginning," Eleanor observed, her tone respectful but unflinching. "Threats to Lady Rosalind's life are hardly incidental details in an arrangement such as ours." A brief silence followed, during which the Duke studied her with an intensity that might have unsettled a woman of less resolve. Then, with a barely perceptible sigh, he moved from behind the desk to occupy the chair opposite hers, a subtle but significant reduction of the physical and symbolic distance between them. "You are correct, Lady Blackwood," he conceded, surprising her with his directness. "I chose to introduce the dangers gradually, believing that an immediate and complete disclosure might prompt you to decline the position. A decision I made not out of lack of respect for your intelligence, but from necessity born of limited options." Eleanor considered this explanation, weighing sincerity against strategy. "The previous companion," she prompted. "The one who received an anonymous letter. Lady Harwick," the Duke supplied, a flicker of frustration crossing his features. "A widow of impeccable breeding but, as it transpired, insufficient fortitude. The letter contained details of previous incidents and insinuations of worse to come, and you feared I might similarly withdraw if presented with the unvarnished truth." "The thought occurred," he admitted with a candor that disarmed her prepared indignation, "particularly as your acceptance was critical to my plans for Rosalind's protection during the season." Eleanor leaned forward slightly, her gaze direct. "Why me, Your Grace? Surely there are women better connected in London society, more experienced in its intricacies." "There are," he agreed readily, "but none who combine your particular qualities. Intelligence without guile, dignity without arrogance, observational skills honed by years navigating the precarious position of a woman in reduced circumstances, and most importantly, none with whom I shared a connection through William that might form the basis of trust." The mention of her husband's name, delivered without artifice or manipulation, prompted Eleanor to gentler inquiry. "How well did you know William truly? He spoke of university acquaintances, but never mentioned a friendship with the Duke of Westmoreland." A ghost of a smile touched the Duke's lips. "We met at Oxford, though our circles rarely overlapped. William, forgive me, Sir William, was everything I was not. Gregarious, spontaneous, beloved by all. I was," he hesitated, selecting words with characteristic precision, "more reserved in my associations. Yet you maintained a connection sufficient for him to seek your help when circumstances grew dire," Eleanor observed. "We encountered each other perhaps once yearly at certain gentlemen's clubs or sporting events," the Duke explained, "enough to maintain a cordial acquaintance. His letter, when it came, surprised me, both in its candor regarding his financial distress and his concern for your welfare. It spoke of a man who, despite his flaws, possessed genuine affection for his wife." Eleanor felt a pang of gratitude toward her late husband, whose final act of care had extended beyond the grave in ways she could never have foreseen. "And now you honor that concern by involving me in matters of life and death." The Duke's expression grew somber. "I would not have done so without belief in your capability. The threat to Rosalind is real, Lady Blackwood. 3 attempts have been made against her in as many months, each disguised as accident or coincidence, each very nearly successful." "Lady Rosalind mentioned her cousin, Lord Julian Carrington, as the likely culprit," Eleanor prompted, watching closely for the Duke's reaction. His jawline tightened almost imperceptibly. "Julian stands to inherit the entailed Carrington estates regardless, but Rosalind's personal fortune, her mother's industrial investments, would remain beyond his reach unless she died without issue before her 18th birthday or marriage." "A powerful motive," Eleanor acknowledged, "made more so by the substantial debts he has accumulated," the Duke added. "Debts that would be immediately settled were he to come into the combined inheritance." Eleanor processed this information, correlating it with what she had learned from Lady Rosalind. "Yet you have invited this man into your home tomorrow. 'Know thy enemy, Lady Blackwood,'" the Duke quoted with grim satisfaction. "Julian believes himself above suspicion, his methods untraceable. His request for an audience suggests he intends to establish his innocuous presence in Rosalind's life before the season properly begins." "A clever strategy," Eleanor conceded, "to be seen publicly as the devoted cousin, concerned only for her welfare." "Precisely." The Duke rose, moving to a sideboard where crystal decanters caught the late afternoon sunlight. "May I offer you sherry? I believe the conversation warrants refreshment." Eleanor accepted with a nod, using the momentary pause to organize her thoughts. As the Duke handed her a crystal glass, their fingers brushed momentarily, a contact brief yet somehow significant, as if the physical touch sealed some unspoken pact between them. "Your role, Lady Blackwood," the Duke continued, resuming his seat, "extends beyond mere chaperonage. You will be my eyes and ears in settings where my presence would alter behavior. You will observe Julian when he is unaware of scrutiny, note his associations, his conversations, particularly those with young men of Rosalind's acquaintance. You suspect he might employ others to accomplish what he cannot risk doing himself," Eleanor deduced, a nod of approval. "Your perception serves you well. Julian possesses both charm and resources sufficient to recruit pawns for his purpose. A young buck in debt, promised relief in exchange for ensuring a riding accident during a park excursion, a servant bribed to tamper with a balcony railing or deliver a tainted sweetmeat. The possibilities, now voiced aloud, sent a chill through Eleanor, despite the sherry's warmth. "How am I to protect Lady Rosalind from such diverse threats?" "You are not alone in this endeavor," the Duke assured her. My most trusted servants have been instructed, my associates alerted to watch for suspicious approaches or inquiries. But you, Lady Blackwood, will be Rosalind's constant companion in the very settings where danger may lurk behind smiling faces and elegant attire. Eleanor sipped her sherry, its sweetness a counterpoint to the bitter reality of their discussion. And if I observe something amiss, you will have means of immediate communication, the Duke explained, reaching into his waistcoat to extract a small silver object. This whistle, when sounded, produces a tone audible only to those specifically listening for it. My men will be positioned at every social function Rosalind attends. He placed the whistle in her palm, a delicate instrument disguised as a decorative pendant, its chain fine enough to be worn as a necklace, yet strong enough to ensure its presence when needed. The craftsmanship spoke of considerable forethought and expense. A remarkable precaution, Eleanor observed, examining the device with new appreciation for the depth of the Duke's planning. One of many, he confirmed. Tomorrow evening at Lady Harrington's musical soirée will be our first public appearance as a connected party. Julian will undoubtedly attend, eager to establish his benevolent interest in Rosalind. It provides an ideal opportunity to observe his methods and connections. Eleanor's fingers closed around the whistle, its weight slight, yet somehow reassuring. I shall not disappoint your confidence, Your Grace. The Duke regarded her with an expression she could not immediately interpret, something beyond approval or satisfaction, something that might, in another man, have resembled admiration. I believe that, Lady Blackwood, he said quietly, which is why, despite Rosalind's premature disclosures, I am gratified by your presence here. The personal nature of this admission, delivered without his customary reserve, prompted Eleanor to a candor of her own. I made a bargain with you, Your Grace. I intend to honor it, with full awareness of its implications now, even knowing the potential danger, perhaps especially because of it, she replied, surprising herself with the truth of the statement. I have spent 18 months in the half-life of widowhood, navigating between social invisibility and predatory attention. To have purpose again, to be of genuine use, it is no small thing. The Duke's expression softened fractionally, revealing the man beneath the title, a glimpse so brief yet profound that Eleanor felt momentarily breathless, as if she had witnessed something rarely seen and precious for its rarity. Then we understand each other, he said, rising to signal the conclusion of their interview. Graves will inform you of dinner arrangements. I suggest rest before this evening. The household dines at 8. Eleanor stood, recognizing the dismissal despite its courteous delivery. As she moved toward the library door, a final question pressed upon her mind with sufficient urgency to warrant one last breach of formality. Your Grace, she ventured, turning at the threshold, what becomes of our arrangement once the season concludes, assuming Lady Rosalind survives the dangers and makes a suitable match? The Duke considered her with those storm-grey eyes that seemed to perceive more than mere appearance. That, Lady Blackwood, will depend upon circumstances not yet fully resolved, but you may rest assured that your future security remains my concern, whatever the outcome. It was both answer and evasion, delivered with such consummate skill that Eleanor could not help but acknowledge its effectiveness with a slight smile. Until dinner, then, Your Grace. As the library door closed behind her, Eleanor stood for a moment in the corridor, the silver whistle warm in her palm, the weight of responsibility both heavier and more welcome than before their conversation. Whatever game was afoot in the grand houses of London, she was now a player in truth, not merely a pawn moved by unseen hands, but a participant whose choices might determine the outcome. For in accepting the Duke's expanded confidence, she had crossed a threshold as significant as the one that had brought her to Westmoreland House. There would be no returning to the quiet desperation of Blackwood Manor, regardless of what transpired in the weeks to come. The die was cast. The season, with all its glittering dangers, awaited. Lady Harrington's drawing rooms blazed with candlelight, the shimmer of crystal chandeliers transforming the assembled aristocracy into creatures of ethereal luminescence. Silks rustled against damask upholstery, jewels caught and refracted light like captive stars, and beneath it all flowed currents of ambition and intrigue as potent as the perfumes that scented the air. Eleanor stood at Lady Rosalind's side, her posture reflecting the precise balance between protector and companion that the Duke had outlined during their private conversation before departure. Her gown, a creation of midnight blue silk with silver embroidery that had appeared mysteriously in her wardrobe that afternoon, allowed her to blend with the elegant assembly while maintaining the dignified restraint appropriate to her ambiguous position. "Courage, my dear," she murmured to Rosalind, whose gloved fingers trembled slightly upon her arm. "Remember, you need only perform one piece. and the Duke has ensured it shall come early in the programme. Rosalind's smile flickered like a candle in a draught. It is not the performance that unnerves me, Lady Blackwood. It is the knowledge that somewhere in this glittering throng lurks a man who would see me dead before my inheritance can be secured. The frank assessment, delivered in tones too low for neighbouring ears, reminded Eleanor that beneath the girl's delicate beauty lay a mind of considerable acuity and unexpected fortitude. "Your guardian's men are positioned throughout the gathering," she assured her charge, "and I remain at your side, whistle at the ready." Indeed, the silver whistle hung from a fine chain around Eleanor's neck, disguised as a pendant of modest elegance. Its presence provided reassurance beyond its practical function, a tangible reminder of the Duke's careful planning and protection. "Lady Rosalind, how utterly enchanting you look tonight." The voice, rich with practiced charm, belonged to a gentleman whose appearance combined fashionable attire with an underlying vigour that spoke of country pursuits. His features held a certain resemblance to Rosalind's, the same fine bone structure and clear blue eyes, though in his case the eyes held a calculation that belied their colour. "Lord Julian," Rosalind acknowledged, her composure admirable despite the slight tension in her frame. "How pleasant to encounter you here. May I present Lady Blackwood, my companion for the season?" Julian Carrington, the cousin whose inheritance prospects might be significantly enhanced by Rosalind's premature demise, executed a bow of perfect depth and duration. "Lady Blackwood, the Duke mentioned your appointment this morning during our most illuminating discussion. A connection through your late husband, I understand." The subtle probing beneath the courteous inquiry did not escape Eleanor's notice. "Indeed, Lord Julian. Sir William and his Grace maintained a friendship spanning many years." The slight embellishment of her husband's connection to the Duke came easily, establishing her position as something more significant than a mere hired companion. "How fortunate that such a connection should lead to your current situation," Julian observed, his smile revealing teeth of perfect regularity. "Westmoreland is known for his particular attention to Rosalind's welfare. Some might say excessively so. Some might say a guardian's primary duty is the protection of his ward," Eleanor countered smoothly, "particularly one of Lady Rosalind's position and prospects." A fleeting expression, too quickly masked to interpret with certainty, crossed Julian's features. "Quite so," he conceded with apparent good humour, "though one hopes such protection does not become restriction. A young lady must be permitted to form connections appropriate to her station." "The Duke is hardly a medieval warden, cousin," Rosalind interjected, her tone achieving a perfect blend of amusement and gentle reproof. "Indeed, he has arranged a full calendar of suitable entertainments for the season." Julian's gaze lingered on his cousin with an intensity that sent a prickle of awareness along Eleanor's spine. "I am delighted to hear it. Perhaps you might honour me with a place on your dance card at Lady Melbourne's ball next week. As family, I have some claim to your attention, after all." Before Rosalind could respond, a presence materialised at Eleanor's side, the Duke himself, resplendent in evening attire that somehow avoided ostentation despite its evident quality. "Carrington," he acknowledged Julian with the barest inclination of his head. "I trust you are enjoying Lady Harrington's hospitality." "Westmoreland," Julian returned, his posture subtly adjusting to reflect the differential in their ranks. "Indeed, I was just expressing to my dear cousin my hopes of seeing more of her during the season. Family connections should be nurtured, should they not?" "When such connections prove beneficial," the Duke replied, his tone revealing nothing beyond polite agreement. "Lady Rosalind, I believe Lady Harrington is organising the musical performances. As you are scheduled to play, perhaps we should join her." With impeccable timing, their hostess approached, her abundant person draped in crimson silk and ancestral diamonds. "Westmoreland, you must allow Lady Rosalind to open our entertainment. Everyone is positively agog to hear the young lady who has been secluded in your household these past months." "Lady Harrington," the Duke responded with perfect courtesy, "we would be honoured. Lady Rosalind has prepared Beethoven's Moonlight Sonata for the occasion." "Splendid, absolutely splendid." Lady Harrington's gaze swept their small group, lingering briefly on Julian with a slight narrowing that suggested awareness of undercurrents. "Lord Julian, I believe Lady Ashworth was hoping for an introduction. May I borrow you momentarily?" It was a masterful manoeuvre, separating Julian from Rosalind with such social deftness that refusal would have been impossible without marked rudeness. As Lady Harrington steered Julian away, Eleanor caught the briefest exchange of glances between her and the Duke, a wordless communication that confirmed the hostess was not merely an unwitting pawn in the evening's careful choreography. "Lady Harrington is an ally," Eleanor murmured as they moved toward the grand pianoforte that dominated one end of the drawing room. Her late husband was my godfather, the Duke confirmed quietly. She is aware of certain concerns regarding Rosalind's welfare. This network of support, more extensive than Eleanor had initially realized, provided additional reassurance as Rosalind took her place at the instrument. The gathered assembly arranged themselves on gilt chairs and satin-covered divans, a sea of wealth and privilege temporarily united in anticipation of musical diversion. Rosalind's performance proved revelatory, not merely in her technical proficiency, which was considerable, but in the emotional depth she brought to the familiar composition. The haunting notes of the first movement flowed from beneath her fingers with a melancholy that transcended mere interpretation, suggesting a soul acquainted with shadows despite her youth and privileged circumstances. Eleanor, positioned where she could observe both Rosalind and the assembled guests, noted Julian's return to the gathering. His attention, fixed upon his cousin with an intensity that might have been mistaken for familial pride by less informed observers, raised the fine hairs at Eleanor's nape. There was something in his gaze beyond calculation or avarice, something that bordered on obsession. A movement at the periphery of the drawing room caught Eleanor's attention. A young footman, unfamiliar among Lady Harrington's well-trained staff, edging closer to the refreshment table where crystal glasses of champagne awaited distribution. His focus, too intent upon Rosalind, mirrored Julian's in a manner that could not be coincidental. Eleanor shifted position slightly, establishing a sightline between herself and the Duke, who stood at the opposite side of the gathering. Their eyes met across the sea of coiffured heads and jeweled bodices, a moment of silent communication in which Eleanor indicated the footman with the slightest inclination of her head. The Duke's response was immediate, yet so subtly executed that none save Eleanor would have detected it, a minimal gesture to a gentleman positioned near the entrance who promptly engaged in seemingly casual conversation with one of Lady Harrington's actual footmen. Within moments, the impostor was quietly escorted from the drawing room, the transition so smoothly managed that not a single note of Rosalind's performance was disrupted. As the final chords of the sonata faded into appreciative silence, followed by enthusiastic applause, Eleanor exhaled a breath she had not realized she was holding, the first potential threat, identified and neutralized without incident. Rosalind rose from the pianoforte with graceful composure, accepting compliments with the perfect blend of modesty and pleasure as she rejoined Eleanor and the Duke. "Magnificent, my dear," the Duke murmured, his customary reserve softened by genuine approbation. "Your mother would have been proud." A flush of pleasure colored Rosalind's cheeks at this rare invocation of her parent. "Thank you, guardian. I hope I did justice to your instruction." "You surpassed it," he assured her, offering his arm to lead her back into the general assembly. "Lady Blackwood, if you would accompany us, I believe Lord and Lady Pembroke wish to make your acquaintance." As they navigated the crowded drawing room, Eleanor noted Julian's position, now across the chamber in conversation with a young man whose attire suggested military service. Their heads were bent in discussion that appeared more intent than social pleasantries would warrant. "The gentleman with Lord Julian," she inquired softly. "Is he known to you, Your Grace?" The Duke followed her gaze, his expression revealing nothing beyond polite interest to any observer. "Captain Miles Thornton, third son of Viscount Hartley, recently returned from service in India with diminished health and, one presumes, diminished finances. A potential pawn in Julian's game, I suspect." The assessment, delivered with characteristic precision, confirmed Eleanor's own suspicions. "I shall make note of any interaction between him and Lady Rosalind." "Excellent," the Duke approved. "Here are the Pembrokes. Lady Pembroke was your mother's dearest friend at school, I believe." This connection, previously unknown to Eleanor, exemplified the Duke's thoroughness in establishing her credentials within society. Throughout the remainder of the evening, similar introductions occurred, each one reinforcing her position not as a mere companion, but as a lady of breeding temporarily reduced in circumstances and now restored to her rightful sphere through ducal patronage. The strategy proved effective. By the time Lady Harrington's musical soiree concluded, Eleanor had established a network of connections that would facilitate her movement through society at Rosalind's side, opening doors that might otherwise have remained closed to a widow of limited means. As their carriage rolled away from the illuminated facade of Lady Harrington's residence, Rosalind relaxed visibly against the velvet squabs. "Well, that is the first hurdle cleared," she observed with wry humor that belied her earlier nervousness. "Only 100 more such engagements to survive before the season concludes." "You performed admirably," Eleanor assured her, patting the girl's gloved hand, "both at the pianoforte and in your social interactions." The Duke, seated opposite them, studied Rosalind with an expression that combined assessment with something warmer, more paternal. "Did you observe anything of note during the evening, Lady Blackwood?" he inquired, turning his attention to Eleanor. "Beyond the footman whom you so efficiently removed?" She considered the question. Lord Julian's conversation with Captain Thornton appeared more significant than casual acquaintance would warrant, and there was a moment, during the refreshments, when Julian positioned himself to observe Lady Rosalind's champagne glass with particular attention. The Duke nodded, unsurprised by her observations. Thornton's circumstances make him vulnerable to financial inducement, and Julian's interest in Rosalind's refreshments suggests a potential avenue of attack we had anticipated. Hence the instruction that she consume only what Graves or I personally provide this evening. Rosalind sighed, a sound of weary acceptance rather than complaint. Another season of watching every morsel and sip. One grows tired of constant vigilance, necessary though it may be. The Duke's expression softened fractionally. "Not for much longer, my dear. Once we secure your position through an appropriate marriage, Julian's opportunities for mischief will be significantly curtailed. Assuming he doesn't eliminate all suitable candidates first," Rosalind murmured, gazing out at the darkened streets of Mayfair. "He has been remarkably effective thus far in discouraging potential suitors." This revelation intrigued Eleanor. "Through what means?" "Rumours primarily," the Duke supplied. "Suggestions of instability in the family line, hints of financial irregularities in the Carrington holdings, whispers about Rosalind's character or health, subtle but effective in a society where reputation is currency." "Then we must counter such rumours with visible evidence to the contrary," Eleanor determined, her mind already formulating strategies. "Regular appearances at select gatherings, controlled interactions with eligible gentlemen under our direct supervision, perhaps even a small dinner party at Westmoreland House, where Rosalind's qualities can be displayed to advantage." The Duke regarded her with that same expression she had glimpsed in the library, something akin to admiration, carefully contained. "My thoughts precisely, Lady Blackwood. I shall leave the arrangements in your capable hands." As Westmoreland House came into view, its imposing facade illuminated by strategically placed torches, Eleanor felt the silver whistle against her skin beneath her gown. A reminder of dangers averted this evening, but certainly not eliminated. The game had merely commenced, the opening moves made with the precision of experienced players. Julian Carrington had revealed himself, however briefly, as a man of resource and determination. The season stretched before them like a battlefield, disguised as a ballroom, with Rosalind's life and fortune as the ultimate prize. Yet as the carriage drew to a halt, and the Duke handed first Rosalind and then Eleanor down to the waiting footman, there was a moment, brief but significant, when his gloved fingers retained hers a heartbeat longer than strict propriety demanded. In that infinitesimal pause, Eleanor felt a connection beyond their formal arrangement, a silent acknowledgement of shared purpose and mutual respect. "Well played, Lady Blackwood," he murmured, for her ears alone. "Well played indeed." The quiet approbation, delivered without embellishment or flattery, warmed Eleanor more effectively than effusive praise might have done. As they ascended the steps of Westmoreland House, the first skirmish concluded in their favour, she recognized a truth both surprising and undeniable. In this household of danger and ducal authority, of midnight whispers and silver whistles, she had found something unexpected, a place where her capabilities were not merely tolerated but valued, her judgment not dismissed but sought. For a woman long accustomed to the limitations imposed by widowhood and reduced circumstances, such recognition was rarer and more precious than all the jewels that had adorned Lady Harrington's illustrious guests. The ballroom of Lord and Lady Melbourne's mansion throbbed with the controlled energy of aristocratic revelry, an elegant swirl of silk and superfine feathers and diamonds, ambition and desire. The orchestra, positioned on a raised dais at one end of the vast chamber, guided the assembly through the intricate patterns of a quadrille, each note a command that the privileged ranks obeyed with practiced precision. Eleanor maintained her position near one of the marble columns that supported the gilt-coffered ceiling, her gaze never straying far from Rosalind, who moved through the dance with Captain Thornton as her partner. The week following Lady Harrington's musical soirée had unfolded according to the Duke's careful design, a progression of morning calls, carriage rides in the park, and smaller evening gatherings that had established Rosalind's presence in society while maintaining the protective structure necessary for her safety. Tonight marked their first appearance at a formal ball, an escalation in both opportunity and risk. Rosalind's dance card had filled within moments of their arrival, despite Julian Carrington's previous efforts to undermine her reputation. The Duke's visible patronage, combined with Eleanor's strategic social maneuvering, had effectively neutralized the whispers, replacing them with curiosity and admiration for the heiress whose fortune and beauty made her the season's most eligible debutante. Lady Blackwood. The voice at her shoulder belonged to the Duke, resplendent in evening attire that emphasized his impressive height and athletic build without ostentation. "I see Rosalind appears to be enjoying herself." "Within the parameters we established," Eleanor confirmed, her tone pitched for his ears alone. "No refreshments except those served by your men, no excursions to the terrace or garden, and no dance lasting beyond observation from either yourself or myself." A nod of approval. "And Captain Thornton, has he attempted any inappropriate conversation?" "Nothing beyond the usual gallantries," Eleanor reported, "though he has twice mentioned his admiration for Lord Julian's new phaeton, a vehicle I understand to be rather beyond the means of a captain on half pay." The Duke's expression did not change, though the slight tension in his jawline betrayed his recognition of the implication. "Julian's generosity to his new friend is indeed remarkable. One wonders what service might warrant such largesse." "Perhaps merely the opportunity to partner Lady Rosalind in the dance," Eleanor suggested, though neither of them believed such an innocent explanation. Captain Thornton secured 2 sets this evening, this quadrille and the waltz before supper. "The waltz shall not occur," the Duke stated with quiet finality. "I have made arrangements for an interruption that will necessitate Thornton's departure before that dance commences." Eleanor raised an eyebrow, intrigued by this development. "May one inquire as to the nature of this interruption?" A ghost of a smile touched the Duke's lips. "A message will arrive regarding his mother's sudden indisposition. The good captain is devoted to Lady Hartley, and will not ignore such a summons, particularly as it comes with the offer of my own carriage to expedite his journey to her side." "Most considerate of you," Eleanor murmured, appreciating the elegance of the solution. Removing Thornton without creating a scene that might reflect poorly on Rosalind or alert Julian to their suspicions. The quadrille concluded, the dancers acknowledging their partners with bows and curtsies, before dispersing across the ballroom in a flutter of conversation and laughter. Rosalind made her way toward Eleanor and the Duke, her cheeks flushed with exertion and pleasure, her blue eyes bright with the excitement of her first proper ball. "Lady Blackwood, guardian," she greeted them, her smile genuine if somewhat breathless. "Is it not a splendid affair? Captain Thornton says the Melbourne's balls are considered the finest of the season." "Captain Thornton appears most attentive," the Duke observed, his tone revealing nothing of his earlier comments regarding the gentleman. "I trust he proved an acceptable partner." "Quite accomplished," Rosalind confirmed, adjusting her long gloves with the unconscious grace of a young lady, well trained in the minutiae of society etiquette. "Though his conversation tends toward military matters to a degree that suggests limited interests beyond the battlefield." Eleanor exchanged a glance with the Duke, both recognizing that Rosalind's assessment contained no particular enthusiasm for the captain, despite his handsome appearance and superficial charm, a promising indication that Julian's potential agent had made little headway in capturing her affections. "Your next dance, I believe, is with Lord Pembroke's son," Eleanor reminded her charge, consulting the dance card that hung from Rosalind's wrist by a silk ribbon. "A country dance, which begins shortly." Rosalind nodded, her gaze sweeping the ballroom with the eager curiosity of youth, temporarily eclipsing the wariness that had become her constant companion. "He seems a pleasant young man, if somewhat scholarly in his interests. Guardian, might I accept a glass of lemonade from one of the servants? The ballroom grows rather warm." "Of course, my dear. Perkins is stationed by the refreshment table expressly for that purpose." The Duke indicated his butler, who indeed stood at attention near the crystal bowls of lemonade and champagne, his dignified presence ensuring that only safe refreshments would reach his master's ward. As Rosalind moved away, navigating the crowded ballroom with the poise the Duke had insisted upon during her months of seclusion, Eleanor noted Julian Carrington's position across the chamber. He stood in conversation with a striking woman, whose mature beauty and elaborate toilette suggested both wealth and worldly experience, a combination that piqued Eleanor's interest, given Julian's focused pursuit of his cousin's fortune. "The lady with Lord Julian," she inquired softly, "is she known to you?" The Duke followed her gaze, his expression revealing nothing beyond polite interest to any observer. "Lady Helena Blackwood. No relation to your late husband's family, I believe." "A widow of considerable means and equally considerable appetite for younger gentlemen. Julian has been among her protégés for some months." The delicate phrasing did not obscure the nature of the relationship implied. "An unusual companion for a man supposedly intent on securing his cousin's inheritance," Eleanor observed, "unless Lady Helena's resources currently fund his activities." "A reasonable supposition," the Duke acknowledged. One which my sources have confirmed. Julian's finances hover perpetually on the brink of collapse, sustained by periodic influxes from Lady Helena's accounts. This information added another layer to the complex dynamics surrounding Rosalind's safety. And does Lady Helena share Julian's interest in hastening Lady Rosalind's demise? That remains unclear, the Duke admitted, though one suspects her interest in Julian would diminish considerably were his financial prospects to improve dramatically through inheritance. The orchestra struck up the opening notes of the country dance, summoning participants to form lines down the centre of the ballroom. Rosalind took her place opposite young Lord Pembroke, her lavender silk gown, a perfect complement to her fair colouring, the modest diamonds at her throat and ears, her mother's, the Duke had informed Eleanor, catching the light from hundreds of candles in the crystal chandeliers overhead. "She looks magnificent," Eleanor murmured, maternal pride warming her voice despite the relatively brief duration of her acquaintance with Rosalind. "You have guided her well, Your Grace." The Duke's expression softened fractionally as he observed his ward. "The credit lies primarily with her natural qualities. I merely provided structure and opportunity. You provided safety and stability when she most needed both," Eleanor corrected gently. No small contribution to the young lady we see before us. Their conversation was interrupted by the arrival of Captain Thornton, who approached with the confident stride of a man accustomed to commanding attention. "Your Grace," he acknowledged the Duke with a bow that managed to suggest military precision without sacrificing social grace. "Lady Blackwood, I must thank you for allowing me the pleasure of partnering Lady Rosalind. She dances as elegantly as she plays the pianoforte." "You are most kind, Captain," Eleanor responded, noting the calculation beneath his charm, a quality reminiscent of Julian Carrington, though less skillfully disguised. "I understand you recently returned from India." "Indeed, ma'am. The climate proved less hospitable than anticipated." Thornton's hand moved unconsciously to his chest, suggesting the respiratory complaint the Duke had mentioned, "though I find London's air equally challenging, if for different reasons." "How fortunate that you have recovered sufficiently to participate in the season's festivities," the Duke observed, his tone revealing nothing beyond conventional courtesy. "Particularly, as I understand military service offers limited opportunities for such diversions." Thornton's smile tightened imperceptibly. "One makes do with what society offers, Your Grace. Some of us must create our own opportunities rather than inheriting them." The subtle barb, delivered with just enough deference to avoid overt offence, confirmed Eleanor's assessment of the captain's character, resentful of privilege while simultaneously courting its favour, a dangerous combination in a man of limited resources and potentially unlimited ambition. Before the Duke could respond, a liveried footman approached their group, bearing a silver salver upon which rested a sealed note. "Captain Thornton, an urgent message, sir." Thornton accepted the missive with a frown that quickly transformed to alarm as he scanned its contents. "Your Grace, Lady Blackwood, I must beg your indulgence. My mother has been taken ill, quite suddenly. I must return to Grosvenor Square immediately." "How distressing," the Duke responded with perfect composure. "Please take my carriage. It awaits outside, and will convey you more swiftly than seeking a hackney at this hour." "Most generous, Your Grace," Thornton acknowledged, his expression caught between suspicion and necessity. "Please convey my apologies to Lady Rosalind for missing our waltz. Perhaps another occasion will present itself." "Perhaps," the Duke conceded non-committally. "Lady Hartley's health must naturally take precedence. I wish her a swift recovery." As Thornton departed with barely concealed haste, Eleanor exchanged a glance with the Duke that acknowledged the successful execution of their strategy. One potential threat neutralized, at least for the evening. "That was rather neatly managed," she observed, as they returned their attention to the dance where Rosalind progressed through the figures with natural grace. "Though I suspect Captain Thornton may harbour some suspicion regarding the timing of his mother's indisposition." "Let him suspect," the Duke replied with unusual vehemence. "So long as he remains at a safe distance from Rosalind, his thoughts on the matter are immaterial." The protective instinct evident in his tone reminded Eleanor that beneath the Duke's controlled exterior lay genuine affection for his ward, a quality that humanized him beyond the austere figure he presented to society at large. The country dance concluded, the participants dispersing once more across the ballroom in a kaleidoscope of colour and movement. Rosalind was immediately surrounded by a group of young ladies her age, their animated conversation and occasional laughter suggesting the normal social interactions too often denied her during her months of seclusion. "She deserves this," the Duke murmured, observing the scene with evident satisfaction. Moments of ordinary pleasure untainted by fear or calculation. Eleanor was struck by the wistfulness in his tone, a rare glimpse of emotion from a man who guarded his feelings as carefully as he guarded his ward. "We shall ensure she has many more such moments," she assured him. "The danger, while real, need not define her entire season." He turned toward her, his storm-grey eyes reflecting a complexity of emotion that momentarily stole Eleanor's breath. "Your perspective brings balance to our endeavors, Lady Blackwood. I find myself grateful for it, beyond the practical advantages of our arrangement." This acknowledgement, delivered without artifice or calculation, touched Eleanor more deeply than elaborate compliments might have done. Before she could formulate a response, however, their attention was diverted by the approach of Julian Carrington, who advanced through the crowd with the practiced ease of a man accustomed to navigating social waters. "Westmoreland," he greeted the Duke with a bow calibrated to acknowledge rank while suggesting a certain equality of standing. "Lady Blackwood, how fortuitous to find you both momentarily unoccupied. I had hoped for an opportunity to discuss a matter concerning Rosalind's upcoming birthday celebration." "Her birthday falls some weeks hence," the Duke observed, his posture subtly shifting to create a more formal distance between himself and Julian. "Well after the conclusion of the season. Precisely why preliminary arrangements must be made now," Julian countered smoothly. "As her nearest male relative after yourself, I naturally wish to contribute to the occasion. Perhaps a special entertainment at my estate in Surrey. The gardens would be at their peak by then." Eleanor noted the calculation beneath the seemingly innocuous suggestion, an attempt to remove Rosalind from the protective structure of Westmoreland House to an environment Julian could control more directly. The Duke's response confirmed her interpretation. "Most thoughtful, Carrington, but unnecessary. Arrangements for Rosalind's birthday have been in progress for some time. A small gathering at Westmoreland House, intimate but befitting the occasion." Julian's expression remained pleasant, though a muscle twitched briefly at his temple. "How disappointing. I had so looked forward to demonstrating cousinly affection in a more expansive manner." "Your affection can undoubtedly find adequate expression within the parameters already established," the Duke responded, his tone courteous but inflexible. "Now, if you'll excuse us, I believe the next dance is forming. Lady Blackwood has promised this waltz to me." This announcement came as a complete surprise to Eleanor, who had no recollection of any such arrangement. Yet she adapted instantly, recognizing the Duke's strategy to remain in close proximity to Rosalind as she danced with young Lord Pembroke, providing an additional layer of protection while simultaneously removing themselves from Julian's increasingly uncomfortable presence. "Indeed, Your Grace," she confirmed smoothly, accepting his offered arm with the practiced ease of a woman accustomed to navigating social complexities. "Lord Julian, you must excuse us." As the Duke led her onto the dance floor, positioning them strategically near Rosalind and her partner, Eleanor felt the curious gazes of the ton upon them. A widow of modest means, waltzing with the Duke of Westmoreland, represented a significant deviation from expected social patterns, a fact that would undoubtedly fuel speculation regarding her exact relationship to one of England's most eligible bachelors. "You realize what impression this creates," she murmured, as his hand settled at her waist with proper formality that nonetheless sent an unexpected warmth through her form. "I do," he acknowledged, guiding her into the opening turn of the waltz with surprising grace for a man who rarely participated in such frivolities. "And I find the tactical advantage worth any resultant gossip. Julian will hesitate to move against Rosalind if he believes you enjoy my particular regard." The practical logic of his explanation should have reassured Eleanor, yet she found herself oddly disappointed by its clinical nature. A calculated risk, then. His gaze met hers with unexpected directness as they moved through the swirling patterns of the dance. "Not entirely calculated, Lady Blackwood," he admitted, his voice dropping to a register that seemed to resonate through her very being. "I find I enjoy your company beyond its strategic value, a circumstance I had not anticipated when proposing our arrangement." This admission, delivered without embellishment or excessive sentiment, affected Eleanor more profoundly than florid declarations might have done. Before she could formulate a response that would not betray her own confused emotions, however, a commotion near the entrance to the ballroom diverted their attention. A footman had entered in evident distress, his proper composure abandoned as he whispered urgently to Lord Melbourne, whose expression transformed from jovial host to grave concern in an instant. The Duke immediately altered their course, guiding Eleanor toward their host with subtle urgency that communicated itself through the pressure of his hand at her waist. "Melbourne," he addressed the visibly troubled nobleman, "is there a matter requiring assistance?" Lord Melbourne turned toward them with evident relief. "Westmoreland, thank heavens. There has been an incident in the gardens. A young lady found unconscious near the fountain. The physician attending Lady Harrington is with her now, but the circumstances are concerning. Eleanor felt the Duke's frame tense beside her, his thoughts undoubtedly mirroring her own. "This young lady," she inquired, striving for composure despite the dread gathering in her breast, "has she been identified?" Melbourne nodded gravely. "Miss Catherine Spencer, Lady Rosalind's particular friend, I believe. They were conversing earlier this evening quite animatedly." The implications crystallized with terrible clarity. Catherine Spencer bore a striking resemblance to Rosalind, similar height and colouring, wearing a gown of comparable lavender hue. In the shadowed garden with limited visibility, a case of mistaken identity, the Duke concluded, his voice dropping to ensure privacy. "Lady Blackwood, locate Rosalind immediately. Do not allow her to leave the ballroom under any circumstances. I shall investigate this incident personally." As he strode away with Lord Melbourne, Eleanor turned toward the dance floor, where Rosalind continued the waltz with Lord Pembroke, blissfully unaware of the apparent attempt on her life that had instead befallen her friend. The silver whistle pressed against Eleanor's skin beneath her gown, a reminder of dangers not merely theoretical, but immediate and evolving. The game had escalated beyond subtle rumors and suspicious servants. Blood had very nearly been spilled, and might yet be if Catherine Spencer's condition proved grave. Whatever Julian's involvement, whatever Thornton's role might have been, the threat had transformed from potential to kinetic, from shadow to substance. And as Eleanor moved purposefully toward Rosalind, her social smile fixed firmly in place despite the tumult within her breast, one certainty crystallized amidst the whirling chaos of the Melbourne ballroom. The season had become a battlefield in truth, and they were fighting not merely for inheritance or position, but for Rosalind's very life. The Duke's study at Westmoreland House, ordinarily a sanctuary of ordered calm, had transformed into a war room in the 3 days following the Melbourne ball. Maps of London and its environs covered the massive oak desk. Correspondence was sorted into precise stacks according to urgency and source, and the Duke himself stood by the window, his powerful frame silhouetted against the afternoon light as he dictated instructions to Mr. Harrington. Eleanor entered without ceremony, her status within the household having evolved beyond formal protocol during the crisis. The Duke turned at her approach, his expression betraying momentary relief before resuming its customary gravity. "How is Miss Spencer?" he inquired, dismissing his secretary with a nod. "Improving," Eleanor replied, settling into the leather armchair that had become her customary place during their strategy sessions. "The physician believes the poison was administered in insufficient quantity to cause permanent harm. Another day of rest, and she should recover fully." "And Rosalind?" "Distressed but resolute," Eleanor reported. "She understands now why we insisted she maintain a visible presence at Lady Harrington's musical luncheon today, despite her concern for Catherine. The public must believe our vigilance remains unaltered by this incident." The Duke nodded approval, moving from the window to occupy the chair opposite Eleanor's. The proximity allowed her to observe the subtle signs of strain that 3 days of relentless investigation had etched upon his features, the faint shadows beneath his eyes, the tightened line of his jaw. Yet his voice, when he spoke, remained steady and precise. "Thornton has disappeared," he informed her, fingers steepled before him in a gesture she had come to recognize as indicating intense concentration. "My men tracked him as far as Portsmouth, where he apparently boarded a merchant vessel bound for the continent. A calculated retreat, suggesting he recognized his role in the affair, might soon be discovered." Eleanor considered this development. "And Julian?" "Maintains a facade of cousinly concern, calling daily to inquire after Rosalind's well-being, while simultaneously circulating rumors that Catherine's accident reflects poorly on my supervision of both young ladies." The Duke's tone remained even, though a muscle twitched briefly at his temple. A strategy designed to position himself as a more suitable guardian should anything unfortunate befall me. The implication sent a chill through Eleanor's frame. "You believe you may now be a target as well." "I have always been an obstacle to his ambitions," the Duke acknowledged with clinical detachment. "However, recent events have provided evidence I previously lacked, evidence sufficient to move from defense to offense." Eleanor leaned forward slightly, intrigued by this shift in approach. "What evidence?" In response, the Duke withdrew a folded document from his waistcoat pocket, placing it on the small table between them. A letter from Lady Helena Blackwood's solicitor to Julian, recovered at considerable expense from her household. It details financial arrangements between them, including specific payments corresponding precisely to dates of previous attempts on Rosalind's life. Eleanor examined the document with care, noting the explicit references to "our mutual investment" and anticipated returns. This suggests Lady Helena's complicity extends beyond merely funding Julian's lifestyle, she observed. She appears to be an active participant in the conspiracy. Indeed, the Duke's expression hardened. And therein lies our opportunity. Lady Helena values her social position above all things, a position that would be irreparably damaged by association with attempted murder. Her loyalty to Julian has limits that financial self-interest will not transcend. Understanding dawned. You intend to approach her directly? Not I, the Duke corrected, his gaze holding Eleanor's with unusual intensity. You, Lady Blackwood. The statement hung between them like a physical presence, its implications expanding in the silence that followed. Eleanor drew a measured breath, processing both the request and the trust it represented. I am to be your emissary, she said, finally, neither accepting nor rejecting, merely clarifying. You are to be my most effective weapon, the Duke amended, leaning forward to emphasize his words. Lady Helena regards me as an adversary, correctly, as it happens. But you she views merely as a companion of convenience, a widow of limited means temporarily elevated by association with my household. She will perceive no threat in a private conversation with such a person. The assessment, while not inaccurate regarding her public persona, nonetheless provoked a flicker of something like disappointment in Eleanor's breast. And what would this conversation entail? A simple exchange, the Duke explained, his tone suggesting the matter was far from simple in execution. You will present Lady Helena with two options: sever all ties with Julian immediately, providing a complete account of their conspiracy that can be used against him if necessary, or face social destruction through careful dissemination of this letter among key members of the ton. Eleanor considered the strategy, identifying both its elegance and its risks. She may deny everything, dismiss the letter as a forgery. She may, the Duke conceded, but her subsequent actions will reveal the truth of her reaction. Moreover, the mere knowledge that such a document exists, authentic or otherwise, will sow doubt regarding Julian's reliability as a partner in crime. Trust, once questioned, is nearly impossible to restore. The logic was impeccable, yet Eleanor hesitated, sensing complexities beyond the immediate tactical considerations. Why me, truly? Your influence far exceeds mine in society. Your threat would carry greater weight. The Duke rose, moving to stand before the fireplace with his back partially turned, a posture that suggested unexpected difficulty in maintaining his customary composure. Because you possess qualities I lack, he admitted after a moment. Perception tempered with compassion, strength without intimidation. Lady Helena will feel herself cornered by my presence alone, potentially provoking desperate measures rather than calculated retreat. He turned to face Eleanor directly, the firelight casting his features into dramatic relief. And because I cannot risk your safety further by confronting Julian directly until Rosalind is secure. If my suspicions prove correct, he has already made preparations against me that await only opportunity for execution. The candor of this explanation, with its implicit acknowledgement of personal concern beyond strategic considerations, affected Eleanor more profoundly than she might have anticipated. When would this meeting occur? Tonight, the Duke replied. Lady Helena hosts her weekly card party, an intimate gathering that provides ideal conditions for private conversation. You would attend as my representative, ostensibly to discuss her potential patronage of the charity musical evening Rosalind is organizing. Eleanor nodded slowly, decision crystallizing within her mind. I shall require certain assurances regarding my approach and, if necessary, extraction. A brief smile touched the Duke's lips, an expression of approval rather than amusement. Naturally. Graves and two of my most trusted men will accompany you, maintaining discreet positions within the household. The whistle you carry will summon them instantly should circumstances warrant intervention. The thoroughness of these preparations reflected the Duke's characteristic attention to detail, yet Eleanor sensed something beyond tactical considerations in his manner, a tension that transcended the immediate crisis. There is more at stake here than Rosalind's inheritance, she observed, watching him closely, something you have not yet revealed. The Duke held her gaze for a long moment, internal conflict evident in the subtle tightening of his features. Then, with a decisiveness that suggested resolution of some private debate, he moved to his desk and unlocked a drawer with a key carried on his person. From it he withdrew a document bearing a familiar burgundy seal, the same that had marked the letter which had begun their extraordinary association. This is the complete account of my investigation into the deaths of Rosalind's parents, he stated, placing the document before Eleanor. The boating accident on Lake Como was nothing of the kind. I have accumulated evidence sufficient to prove murder, evidence that implicates not only Julian Carrington, but certain officials whose corruption facilitated the crime's concealment. Eleanor accepted the document with a sense of solemn gravity, understanding that this disclosure represented a level of trust few had ever received from the Duke of Westmoreland. You seek not merely to protect Rosalind's inheritance, but to bring her parents' murderers to justice. Justice, the Duke echoed, the word carrying weight beyond its simple syllables. Yes, though perhaps justice inadequately expresses my purpose. Rosalind's father was more than my cousin, Lady Blackwood. He was my closest friend from childhood, the one person who saw beyond the title to the man beneath. His death. He paused, mastering emotion with visible effort. His death left a void that duty alone cannot fill. This glimpse into the personal motivation behind the Duke's actions transformed Eleanor's understanding of the man himself. Behind the facade of ducal authority and strategic calculation lay a heart capable of profound loyalty and equally profound loss, a revelation that awakened answering chords within her own experience of grief. I understand, she said simply, the words carrying more meaning than their brevity might suggest. And I will help you secure both Rosalind's safety and the justice her parents deserve. Something shifted in the Duke's expression. Gratitude mingled with another emotion Eleanor could not immediately identify. I have come to rely upon your judgment, Lady Blackwood, in ways I had not anticipated when proposing our arrangement. The acknowledgement, delivered without artifice or calculation, prompted Eleanor to a candor that matched his own. Our arrangement has evolved beyond its original parameters, Your Grace. Perhaps we might acknowledge that development. Before the Duke could respond, a sharp knock interrupted their exchange. Graves entered with uncharacteristic haste, his dignified demeanor betraying subtle signs of urgency. Your Grace, forgive the intrusion. Lord Julian Carrington has arrived, insisting upon an immediate audience regarding Lady Rosalind. He appears agitated. The Duke and Eleanor exchanged a glance fraught with significance. Julian's unexpected appearance, particularly in a state of visible distress, suggested developments beyond their current intelligence. Show him to the blue drawing room, the Duke instructed after a moment's consideration. Inform him I shall join him directly. As Graves departed, he turned to Eleanor. This may prove advantageous. An agitated Julian is more likely to reveal vulnerabilities we can exploit. Or to act rashly, Eleanor cautioned, concern evident in her tone. If he believes his plans are compromised, all the more reason to confront him directly, with witnesses present. The Duke's expression had shifted from reflective to resolute, the strategist once more ascendant. Lady Blackwood, your presence during this interview would be valuable. Julian underestimates you, perceiving only the widowed companion rather than the formidable intellect I have come to respect. The compliment, delivered as simple fact rather than flattery, warmed Eleanor even as she recognized the tactical advantage her presence might provide. Of course, Your Grace, though perhaps I might suggest a slight modification to our approach regarding Lady Helena this evening. A raised eyebrow invited elaboration. If Julian appears truly desperate, might it not serve our purposes to present him with evidence of Lady Helena's potential betrayal? A carefully worded suggestion that his partner in crime has opened negotiations with you could provoke revelations more valuable than anything Lady Helena might voluntarily disclose. The Duke considered this proposal, appreciation evident in his expression. Psychological pressure applied from multiple directions simultaneously. Yes, most effective. He offered his arm, a gesture that had become natural between them despite its deviation from strict propriety. Shall we discover what brings Julian to our door in such evident distress? As they proceeded toward the blue drawing room, Eleanor felt the weight of the silver whistle against her skin beneath her gown, a reminder of dangers not yet neutralized, of battles still to be fought. Yet alongside this awareness of peril came a surprising sense of certainty, not merely in the Duke's protection, but in her own capacity to influence the outcome of the confrontation to come. For in the crucible of danger and shared purpose, Eleanor Blackwood had discovered strengths long dormant during her years of widowed seclusion, strengths the Duke had recognized from their first meeting, perhaps more clearly than she herself had done. Whatever Julian's desperate gambit might entail, she would face it not merely as the Duke's ally in a tactical arrangement, but as a woman who had found her voice and power in circumstances she could never have foreseen when breaking the seal on a letter bearing a falcon crest. The game approached its final moves, and Eleanor intended to be present when checkmate was declared. Autumn sunlight gilded the formal gardens of Westmoreland House, transforming the last roses of the season into cups of amber fire and setting the turning leaves of the lime trees ablaze. Eleanor stood upon the terrace, wrapped in a shawl of fine cashmere against the morning chill, observing the tranquil scene with a sense of completion that transcended mere satisfaction. 3 months had passed since the dramatic confrontation in the blue drawing room, a confrontation that had culminated in Julian Carrington's arrest for conspiracy to commit murder, based on evidence provided by Lady Helena Blackwood in exchange for discretion regarding her own complicity. The society papers had feasted upon the scandal for weeks, each revelation more sensational than the last, until Julian's hasty departure for the continent under cover of night had provided a suitably dramatic conclusion to the affair. For Rosalind, the resolution had brought not merely safety but a freedom she had scarcely known since her parents' deaths. With Julian's threat neutralized and her inheritance secure, she had blossomed in ways that delighted both her guardian and Eleanor, displaying a natural vivacity long suppressed by necessary caution. Deep thoughts, Lady Blackwood. The Duke's voice, now familiar as her own heartbeat, drew Eleanor from her contemplation. He joined her at the terrace balustrade, his tall figure a reassuring presence beside her own more delicate form. The morning light caught the silver now visible at his temples, a recent development that somehow enhanced rather than diminished his commanding appearance. Reflections, she corrected gently, on the extraordinary journey from Blackwood Manor to this moment. He nodded understanding, his gaze following hers across the autumn garden. A journey neither of us could have anticipated when I appeared on your doorstep with violets and a sealed letter. You planned much of it, Eleanor observed without accusation. The rescue from financial ruin, the position within your household, the role as Rosalind's protector, all carefully orchestrated to serve your purpose. True, the Duke acknowledged with characteristic directness, yet I could not have foreseen how essential you would become to that purpose's fulfillment, nor how your presence would transform more than merely Rosalind's circumstances. The admission, delivered with a vulnerability rare in a man of his position, prompted Eleanor to a candor that matched his own. Transformation appears to have been mutual, Your Grace. I arrived at Westmoreland House a widow defined by loss of husband, fortune, and purpose. I discovered capabilities long dormant, strengths unacknowledged even by myself. Your Grace, he echoed, a note of gentle reproach in his tone. After all we have shared, might we not dispense with such formality in private, Eleanor? The use of her given name, spoken with a warmth that belied his customary reserve, sent a current of awareness through her frame. James, she responded, the intimate address still new upon her tongue, despite weeks of cautious progression toward greater familiarity. Yes, I believe circumstances warrant such liberty between us. A smile softened his austere features, a genuine expression of pleasure rather than the calculated social mask he presented to society. Circumstances, yes, though perhaps warrant suggests mere permission rather than preference. Eleanor turned toward him fully, studying the face that had become dear to her in ways she had never anticipated when accepting his initial proposal. Then, let us say that preference and circumstance align fortuitously in this instance. Fortuitous indeed, James agreed, his gaze holding hers with an intensity that required no verbal elaboration. After a moment, he withdrew a small object from his waistcoat pocket, a letter sealed with the now familiar burgundy wax bearing the falcon crest. I have something for you, a document requiring your attention. Eleanor accepted the offering with curious fingers, noting the quality of the paper and the perfect impression of the signet ring in the wax seal. Another proposal? Of a different nature than our first arrangement, he confirmed, a rare hint of uncertainty shadowing his expression. One I hope you will find more personally satisfying in its parameters. Understanding dawned as Eleanor weighed the letter in her palm, its significance far exceeding its physical substance. This proposal, does it involve a more permanent association between us? It does, James acknowledged, his composure slipping to reveal the man beneath the ducal authority. Though I would not have you break this seal from obligation or gratitude, Eleanor. The contents await your attention only if your heart inclines toward the possibility they represent. The directness of this declaration, devoid of flowery sentiment yet profound in its honesty, touched Eleanor more deeply than elaborate protestations of devotion might have done. She studied the burgundy seal, the same that had altered her fate once before, and made her decision with the clarity of purpose that had become her hallmark during the extraordinary events of the season past. Some seals, she observed, meeting his gaze with unwavering certainty, are meant to be broken only when the heart is ready to receive what lies within. With deliberate care, she slipped the unopened letter into the pocket of her morning dress. "I shall read your proposal this evening, James, after I have had time to compose a proper response, one that reflects not merely acceptance of terms offered, but full participation in their creation." Understanding illuminated his features, followed by something rarer and more precious, genuine joy, unrestrained by the reserve that had governed him for so long. "You negotiate from a position of strength, Eleanor, a quality I have admired from our first meeting." "A quality you recognized before I reclaimed it myself," she acknowledged, gratitude warming her tone. "For that gift alone, you have my enduring appreciation. For all else that has grown between us." She paused, finding words inadequate to express the complex evolution of their relationship, from strategic alliance to something far more profound. James closed the distance between them with a single step, taking her gloved hand in his own, a gesture restrained yet intimate in its simple contact. "Some truths require no verbal declaration," he observed softly. "They are evident in actions, in choices, in the silent language of souls who recognize in each other what they most value." Eleanor felt the weight of the letter in her pocket, the promise it contained, the future it represented, not as rescue or arrangement or bargain, but as partnership between equals, each bringing their unique strengths to an alliance of both heart and mind. From the garden below came Rosalind's voice, bright with laughter, as she directed the placement of chrysanthemums for the small celebration planned to mark her official coming of age, an 18th birthday that, months earlier, had seemed a dubious prospect rather than a joyful certainty. "She has flourished beyond all expectation," Eleanor observed, maternal pride evident in her tone. The shadow lifted from her spirit, the caution no longer necessary with every breath. "Thanks in no small measure to your influence," James acknowledged. "You brought balance to her life and to mine, when it was most needed." A comfortable silence enfolded them, rich with shared understanding and unspoken promise. The autumn breeze carried the scent of late roses and wood smoke, the essence of transition from one season to another, a fitting metaphor for their own evolution from widow and duke, bound by strategic necessity, to Eleanor and James, joined by bonds that transcended mere arrangement. As they stood together on the terrace of Westmoreland House, the morning sun warming their faces, and the sealed letter a tangible promise between them, Eleanor recognized a truth that would have seemed impossible during those desperate days at Blackwood Manor, when creditors threatened and Lord Reeves circled like a predator scenting weakness. Some journeys, beginning in danger and necessity, lead to destinations of unexpected joy. Some arrangements entered for protection or advantage evolve into connections that transform the very souls who forge them, and some seals, broken at precisely the right moment, release not merely obligations or proposals, but the very essence of futures reimagined and hearts renewed. For Eleanor Blackwood, once desperate widow and now cherished partner to the Duke of Westmoreland, such transformation had come not through dramatic declaration or grand gesture, but through the steady revelation of character under pressure, of strength discovered in adversity, of trust earned through actions rather than words. The burgundy seal in her pocket awaited its breaking. But the bond it represented had already formed, stronger than wax and more enduring than any formal document could express. The seal of their shared destiny had been set long ago, not in burgundy wax, but in choices made, dangers faced, and truth acknowledged between two souls who had found in each other precisely what they most needed, at exactly the moment they were prepared to recognize it. And that, Eleanor reflected as James's hand tightened gently around her own, was the most profound arrangement of all. In the shadows of our greatest vulnerabilities often lie the seeds of our most profound strength. Like Eleanor, we may find ourselves cornered by circumstance, our options seemingly narrowed to paths we would never willingly choose. Yet it is precisely in these moments of desperate constraint that our true character emerges, not in grand gestures of heroism, but in the quiet dignity with which we face each day, the resilience we discover when all external supports have fallen away. The Duke's gloved hand upon the Rake's shoulder reminds us that power wielded with restraint is the truest expression of strength. Not in domination do we find our greatest impact, but in the measured application of our influence, in service of those who cannot protect themselves. The hand that rests rather than strikes, that steadies rather than subjugates, reveals a soul that understands the profound responsibility that accompanies privilege. Perhaps most poignantly, this tale reminds us that the connections we forge in the crucible of shared purpose often prove more lasting and meaningful than those born in easier times. Eleanor and the Duke, brought together by necessity rather than choice, discovered in each other qualities that complemented their own. Her perceptive compassion, balancing his strategic strength, his unwavering protection, allowing her dormant capabilities to flourish. Their journey from arrangement to affection reflects a deeper truth about human connection. That love of the most enduring kind grows not from infatuation, but from mutual respect, shared values, and the recognition of another's inherent worth. As we navigate our own labyrinths of obligation and opportunity, may we remember that our true destiny often unfolds in ways we could never have planned, that the sealed letters appearing unexpectedly in our lives may contain within them the very purpose we have been seeking. And may we have the courage, like Eleanor, to break those seals when the moment is right, stepping forward into futures we could not have imagined, but which, in retrospect, we will recognize as the path we were always meant to walk. For in the end, it is not the gloved hands of others that determine our fate, but the choices we make when confronted with both opportunity and adversity. It is in these moments that we discover not merely who we are, but who we might become when necessity awakens the sleeping strength within us. Were you captivated by the journey of Eleanor and the Duke? Did you find yourself holding your breath as they navigated the dangerous waters of society to protect Lady Rosalind from those who sought her downfall? If this tale of dignity preserved and strength discovered in unlikely circumstances touched your heart, I invite you to subscribe now so you never miss another story that illuminates the hidden corners of the human experience. The power of stories lies in their ability to transport us to different worlds while revealing truths about our own. By subscribing, you'll join a community of kindred spirits who appreciate the artistry of language and the enduring power of narratives that remind us of our capacity for growth, courage, and connection. I would be honored to hear your thoughts on The Rake Cornered a Widow in the comments below. Which character resonated most deeply with you? What moment in the story stirred your emotions? Your reflections not only enrich my understanding as a storyteller, but create meaningful connections with fellow readers who have walked these same narrative paths. Subscribe now and comment below. Let us continue this journey together through worlds both imagined and deeply, profoundly real.